decided what happened to the garbage. Emily said it out loud, the thing neither of us wanted first in the room. If the oracle gives you a bad occupation, a production one, her hands nodded in her lap. They executed a minister once, right there in the hall, the day he drew Builder. What if father does that to you? I sat up and took both her hands in mine before she could spiral any further. They were cold. Listen to me, I said. I'm going to walk into that hall, and I'm going to walk back out, and I'm going to come home to you. I promise. I always come back. She didn't quite believe me, but she nodded, because I needed her to, and that was the kind of sister she was. Mother called us to breakfast before Emily could start crying, which was her gift. Sensing the exact moment a room needed to be interrupted, she had made bread and soup, the same as always, except the soup had more in it than usual. Extra vegetables, a little meat she must have saved for days. We were royalty in name only, 9th prince, 7th queen's son, and this was the life the king had decided we were worth. My mother ladled it out like it was a feast, and to us, it nearly was. I used to lie awake and promise myself I would fix this, that one day I would draw something grand at the ceremony, climb high enough to matter, and move the two of them into real rooms in a real palace, with a fire that never went low and a table that never rationed the meat. That was the whole of what I wanted. Not a throne, just enough standing to keep my mother and my sister safe. I looked at the two of them across that little table, and I wanted it so badly it hurt to breathe. Good luck today, Alan. She set the bowl in front of me and smoothed my hair the way she had since I was small. You'll make a fine holy knight. I've always known it. I didn't tell her that a holy knight was one of the rarest draws in the kingdom. I let her have the morning. She had earned a little hope. We ate. Emily kicked me under the table for slurping. For a few minutes, it was just the three of us in a warm, small room, and I let myself forget what was waiting. Then the wheels came. A carriage in the lane outside, sent from the castle to collect me. Emily's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. I stood. I kissed my mother's cheek, and I hugged my sister until she stopped shaking, and I told them both again that I would be back before nightfall. Then I climbed into the carriage and let it carry me toward the one place in the kingdom I had spent my whole life avoiding. A butler met me at the castle steps and walked me in through doors twice the height of a man. I had seen my father maybe 4 times in my life, always from a distance, always in a parade. I had never stood inside his hall. It swallowed me whole, marble everywhere, banners the length of the ceiling, and up at the far end, raised on a dais, above all of it, the king on his throne, a heavy crown, a curled beard, and eyes that moved across the crowd of us like a man counting coins and finding several of them counterfeit. My father. He did not look at me. He had never once looked at me. I was still staring up at him when a hand shoved my shoulder. Barrett, the 7th prince, red hair spiked like something wild, built like a street brawler who had wandered into silk. He was 1 month younger than me, and I still had to call him brother because his mother outranked mine, and he never let me forget which way that math ran. He sneered that I was as creepy as ever, gawking at father like a beggar at a bakery window, and told me to enjoy my last hour of pretending I mattered, because a runt like me was destined for some grubby production class, while he climbed to a real one. That's enough, Barrett. You've got the foulest mouth of all of us, and that's a contest. The voice came from behind me, easy and amused, and Barrett's smirk curdled the second he heard it. Roland, the first prince, short blonde hair, the kind of handsome that made the whole court soften when he entered a room. He was the only one of my brothers who had ever bothered to learn my name. Barrett muttered something and slunk off into the crowd. Roland watched him go, then leaned in close so only I could hear. Don't let him get to you, he told me quietly. Between us, Alan, of all the princes in this hall, you're the one I have hopes for. You're the only one without the arrogance. Draw whatever you draw. We'll make this kingdom better anyway. I thanked him, and I meant it. It was the first kind thing anyone in this castle had ever said to me. I held on to it. The minister called the ceremony to order and summoned us forward one by one. The priest stood at the center of the floor with his hands raised, and when he spoke his revelation over a prince, that prince's body lit up from the inside. Yellow light meant a combat class, glory. The whole hall had learned to hold its breath for the color. Roland went first, as the eldest. Golden light poured off him, and the priest named him Paladin. The court roared its approval. My second brother Gilbert stepped up next, nervous and clever, and the light took him too, gold as a sunrise. Great sage. More applause. Louder still. It went on down the line. One brother drew beast to mare, another, martial artist. Every single one of them lit up yellow, and every single time, the hall answered with the same warm thunder of respect. Then Barrett swaggered onto the floor, and the light claimed him gold, and the priest named him warrior. He turned and found my face in the crowd and grinned like he had already won. Then it was my turn. I walked to the center of that enormous floor with the whole court watching, and I stood where my brothers had stood, and the priest raised his hands over me and spoke the revelation. The light came. It was green, not gold, not the warm yellow of a combat class, a pale, sickly green, the color the whole kingdom had been taught to sneer at, and it climbed up my body while the priest's face twisted into something close to disgust. The hall went silent, not the held breath from before, a different silence, the kind that empties out of a room when everyone in it has just decided you are nothing. The priest lowered his hands, and into that dead quiet, he proclaimed my divine occupation in a single word: architect, a production class, the most useless kind of the most despised kind. In the Progress Kingdom, there was no lower thing a body could light up as: a builder, a patcher of walls and mender of ladders, the class men whispered about only to laugh, the class a minister had been executed for drawing in this very hall, and now it was mine, spoken over me by a priest who could not keep the disgust off his face in front of every noble in the kingdom and the father who had made me. I stood in the center of that floor and I felt it happen. One word, and every ounce of respect I had ever scraped together in this castle drained straight down through the marble and was gone. The brothers who had been forced to call me theirs looked at me now like a thing tracked in on a boot. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed, low and delighted, and the laugh was worse than the silence had been. I did not move. I could not have told my legs how. My father did not rise. That was the part I would carry out of that room and never set down. A man passing sentence on his own son, and he could not be bothered to stand. He looked down at me from the throne the way you look at a stain, and he told the hall what he had decided. He said the bloodline of Bloodford had no use for a production occupation. He stripped my name from the line of succession in one flat sentence, as if crossing out a word he had written by mistake. And then he condemned me, exile, to the Blackfang Forest, the monster-choked wild beyond the kingdom's edge, where no one was sent to live. People were only ever sent there to die. I broke. I am not ashamed to say it. I dropped to my knees on that cold floor and I begged, "Please, your majesty, I'll take any work. A soldier, a gardener, a hand in the sewers, anything at all. Just let me stay in the capital." He told me his word was absolute, and then he said the thing. He called me a disappointment. He said he was ashamed of me. He said it the way another man might comment on the weather, and I understood, kneeling there, that the worst part of it was not the exile. The worst part was that some small, stupid piece of me had still wanted this man to be proud. That piece died on the marble. Off to the side, Barrett was smirking, drinking it in. Behind his hand, my brother Grant hid a grin so wide it split his whole face. Only one person moved. "Father, wait!" Roland stepped out of the line and put himself half between me and the throne. He did not shout. He asked carefully, as a paladin and a son, that if the sentence could not be undone, then at least I be given a little time, a chance to prepare, a chance to say goodbye. The king waved a hand. 10 minutes, not one more. Roland turned that 10 minutes into everything he could. He was already barking at the servants before I had gotten off my knees, sending them running for water, for food, for a blade, and whatever tools they could carry. They came back with a pack, and he pushed it into my arms himself, and there was nothing else he could do, and we both knew it. "Thank you," I told him. "Truly, Roland." He didn't answer. He just looked at me like a man watching a door close on someone he couldn't reach. Then the priest lit the circle beneath my feet. The magic took hold, and the marble hall vanished. The world came back as trees, enormous ones, black-barked, packed so close the sky was just a memory, somewhere above the canopy. The air was wet, and it stank of rot, and every direction looked exactly like the last. Somewhere off in the dark, something large moved and went still. This was the Blackfang Forest, and it had eaten stronger people than me. I stood there with a dead man's supplies on my back and a knife in my hand, and I hit the bottom of everything. No name, no home, no mother, no sister, no way back through the trees to the small, warm kitchen where they were still waiting for me to come home before nightfall. Just the knife, and the dark, and a forest that was going to kill me by morning. I thought about my mother setting an extra bowl tonight for a son who was never walking back through that door. I thought about Emily by the gate, waiting the way she always waited. Sure, I was just late again. Every road out of this moment ended the same way, and the weight of that nearly put me on my knees a second time in one day. And then, at the very bottom, something turned over. Standing there, I made a choice. I was not going to lie down in the mud and give this forest what my father had already decided I was worth. I was not going to let that man be right about me. I was going to live. I was going to survive out here, and I was going to get strong. And one day, I was going to stand in front of the man who threw me away and make him take back every word. He called me a disappointment. Fine. I would make him look at what the disappointment built for the rest of his life. That was the moment the fear turned into something with a spine. I made myself think. An architect had skills, even a useless one. So I checked what the occupation had actually handed me, expecting tool repair and ladder work, the little nothings the class was known for. That was not what I found. I had 2 skills, both sitting at level 1, and neither of them belonged on any architect I had ever heard of. One was called construction, the other was called demolition. I did not fully understand them, but there was a tree in front of me, a huge old oak, half dead and leaning, and the word construction sat in my mind like a tool waiting for a hand. So I walked up to it, and I put my palm flat against the cold bark, and I told it, without much hope, to become something I could live in. The tree answered. It came apart, and it rebuilt itself in the same breath, wood folding and stacking and squaring off. And where a dying oak had stood a moment before, there was a house. An actual house, snug logs and a doorway and 4 walls, built exactly the way I had pictured it, down to the last beam. It had not existed a minute ago. I had made it by asking. I stood in front of that little log house in the middle of a forest that was supposed to be my grave, and for the first time all day, I forgot to be afraid. The whole kingdom had called this skill trash. The whole kingdom had stopped listening to me the second I glowed the wrong color, but the forest was listening. The dead oak had done exactly what I asked. I stepped through the doorway I had made, out of the dark and into 4 walls that were mine, and I decided right then what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I was going to build. I was going to build something so large my father would have no choice but to look at it and know exactly whose hands had made it. The house didn't have a bed. It didn't have anything. A floor, a ceiling, 4 walls, 2 pillars I hadn't meant to leave standing, and a window the size of my 2 hands. I stood in the middle of it while the last light drained out of that little window and told myself this counted as a roof over my head. It did. An hour ago, the forest had offered me a knife and a place to die, and now I had walls. I dropped the pack Roland had bought me and sat against a pillar. Dinner was water and biscuits. Whoever packed them had gone heavy on the sugar, so sweet they set my teeth on edge, but I ate 3 and took 1 careful swallow of water and made myself stop. There was dried meat and dried fish underneath. I didn't touch either. I had no idea how long any of it had to stretch. I meant to stay awake and think. My body had other plans. I was asleep before I'd decided to be. Sunrise came in through the little window and put a bar of light across my face, and that was my alarm clock now. I ate half a biscuit, drank the smallest mouthful I could stand, and went out to solve the only problem that actually mattered: water. Everything else could wait. A man can go a while without food. Without water, in a place this hot under the canopy, I'd be finished in days, and I had maybe 2 swallows left in the flask. So I walked. I kept the house in sight, then in memory, marking trees so I could find my way back. I found no stream, no spring, nothing that dripped or pooled. What I did find was food, a patch of low weeds I recognized from a survival lesson I'd once slept through and only half remembered. I chewed a leaf, waited, didn't die, and ate a few more. Bitter, green, real. I almost laughed. A prince, grazing on roadside weeds like a goat. Around midday, I came to a stretch of dry, broken ground, all gray rock and no soft earth, and I sat on a boulder to rest my legs. That was when I remembered I had a second skill I'd barely tested. Construction had turned a tree into this house. The other one, the priest had called demolition, and I had no idea what it actually did. I put my hand flat on the boulder I was sitting on and told it to come apart. It did. Not into gravel, not into dust. It simply thinned under my palm and drained into me. The whole boulder, gone, poured into my arm like water down a drain, and I felt it go somewhere, not into my stomach, into some space inside me that I'd never known was there, a room with no walls that could hold a mass no room should. I sat there with a boulder inside me and no heavier than before. Well, I said to nobody. That's new. I tried it again on a second rock, then a third. On the 4th, the room said no. I felt the edge of it, a full to the brim pressure, and knew without being told that 3 large rocks was all it would take. 3 carts worth of anything, more or less, and then the door was shut. Level 1. That was the reason I was sure of it. The skill was new, the way I was new to it, and rooms like that grow. A magic box was a legend, a treasure kings fought wars over, a thing that could swallow any weight and carry it weightless. I had one built into my ribs, and mine was only going to get bigger. The trash class, the one that emptied a throne room of respect the moment they named it. I was still smiling about that when the ground in front of me shivered, and something came around the rocks that was the wrong color to be a stone. Blue, wet, bright as a bead of glass, and the size of a curled up dog. It sat there and quivered and looked, as far as a thing with no eyes can look, straight at me. A slime. I'd read about them the way you read about the weather in a country you'll never visit. Harmless looking, slow, and they killed more careless travelers than half the fanged things in a forest because a slime doesn't bite. It jumps. It lands on your face and spreads, and it holds there, soft and patient, until you've breathed your last through it. You can cut it, but it knits back together in a blink, so you'd better cut fast or blow it apart in one blow. I had neither speed nor a blow. I had a knife I wasn't sure of, and a skill for taking things apart, so I tried the obvious thing. I reached for it with demolition, the way I'd reached for the rock, and told it to come undone. Nothing. The skill slid off it like a hand off wet soap. Alive. It wouldn't take a living thing. The rock had held still because a rock is already dead, and this was very much not. Then it leapt. I threw myself sideways, and it splattered wide across the stone where my head had been, already gathering itself back into a ball, already turning. I had one thing in me, and I used it. I put my hand to the ground and gave the room in my ribs its order. Out, all of it, into shape. Construction took the 3 rocks I'd swallowed and built them, fast, into a single slab of stone directly above the slime and let it fall. The sound was flat and final, and very wet. I stood there breathing hard, waiting for it to squelch back out from under the edges. It didn't. Under all that weight, there was nothing left to knit. My first kill in the forest, and I'd done it by dropping a house's worth of rock on a puddle. I heaved the slab aside. What was left of the slime lay there, still, dead in the way the rock had been dead. So I knelt, and I put my hand on it, and I told demolition to try again. This time, it took. The slime drained into me the way the boulder had, and something came with it. 2 somethings. They arrived in my head fully formed, the way a word you'd forgotten drops back onto your tongue. I knew, without a stat window, without a voice, without anyone to tell me, exactly what I now had. The thing that let the slime knit itself whole after every cut, and the thing that let it be water when it wanted to. Auto repair, water body, his, now mine. I sat down on the cracked slab because my legs wanted me to, because here was the whole shape of it, laid out plain. Demolition didn't only eat rock, it harvested, kill the monster, take it apart, and keep whatever made it dangerous. And construction didn't only stack stone, it built with whatever I fed it, which meant I could take the slime's power to heal, and I could pour it into a wall. I could make a house that mended its own cuts. I could take the slime's water and give it to a beam, a door, a floor. Every monster in this forest that had ever been used to kill someone was, from where I was sitting, a thing I could break down into a part for something I was building. The kingdom had named this class garbage and thrown it into a forest to be eaten, and the forest was going to hand me itself, one dead monster at a time. I laughed then, properly, alone on a rock with slime water still cooling around me. My father had looked at this and called it a disappointment. My father had never seen what it did when you fed it. I went home to test it, because a builder doesn't trust a thing until he's watched it work twice. I laid a hand on the wall by the door and pushed the healing into it, auto repair, into the wood. Then I dragged my knife across the plank, a good hard scratch, and watched the gouge close over itself and vanish like ice melting in reverse. The wall healed. My wall healed. Then I pushed the other one into the wall beside it, the water, and slapped my palm against the plank. It gave. It rippled under my hand like the skin of a drum made of pawn, then firmed back. A wall you could throw a spear at and watch it bounce. I stood between the 2 of them, one that mended and one that bent, and I understood that I was not building a house anymore. I was building an armory that happened to have a roof, and I could reach back in with demolition and pull a skill out of a wall the same way I'd pulled it out of the slime, move it wherever I needed it. Nothing was spent. Nothing was wasted. Everything I killed, I kept, and everything I kept, I could move. I slept better that night than a man in my situation had any right to. By morning, my water was nearly gone, and the weeds weren't going to save me. I needed the river I was sure this place had to have somewhere, and I was tired of hunting for it one footstep at a time under a roof of leaves that hid everything. So I did the only thing my particular set of skills was good for. I stopped looking from the ground. I took apart 3 of the big trees around the house, one after another, drinking them down into the room in my ribs as lumber until the room in my ribs was full to its brim. Then I stood in the clear space I'd made, put my hand down, and told construction to build me the tallest thing it could, up, not out. A single enormous trunk, growing under my feet like a beanstalk in a children's tale, carrying me with it. Whoa, 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 whoa. I grabbed on and rode it. The canopy came at me green, and then I was through it, out into open sky and wind and light for the first time in 2 days, standing at the top of a tree I had made, higher than any tower back home. The forest ran out in every direction, huge and hungry, and mine to cross. And there, to the west, no more than a few miles off, a thin, bright ribbon caught the sun and threw it back at me. Water. A river, running clear through the trees, close enough to reach before dark. There you are, I said, to the whole green world. Then I dismantled the tree out from under myself, rode it down in a controlled collapse of lumber back into my ribs, and started walking west. The river was real. I want to be honest about how close I came to just falling into it face first. I made myself stop at the edge and do it right. I cupped a little in my hand and touched it to my lips. Just a taste, I told myself. Just a little. I waited. My mouth didn't burn. My stomach didn't turn. It's fine, I said, quieter. And then I believed it. It's definitely fine. I drank until I was ashamed of myself. And then I did the thing that made this whole cursed skill worth having. I put my hands in the current and told Demolition to take the water the way it had taken the rock. And it did. It poured the river into me, weightless, held in that room with no walls. 5 buckets of it before I eased off. 5 buckets of clean water carried inside my own body across a forest that had nearly killed me over a dry flask. Whatever else the priest's word had cost me, a man who never runs out of water does not die easily, which left food. My rations were down to a sad little handful, and in 2 days, I'd seen no deer, no birds worth the name, nothing ordinary and edible, only monsters. It was starting to look like the forest didn't grow anything that wasn't trying to eat you. Fine, I thought, then I'll eat one of them back. It came for me before I'd finished the thought. Low and quick and dark, off a tree trunk and into the air, a rabbit the size of a hound, with a panther's spotted hide and a mouth that was mostly fangs. A panther rabbit. It didn't run. It bounced off one trunk and then the next, ricocheting toward my throat faster than a thing that shape had any right to move. You look starving, I told it, and set my feet. Too bad. You're the one who's dinner. It launched off a trunk to my left, aimed to come down on me, so I took the trunk. My hand hit the wood, and Demolition swallowed the whole tree. In the half second the rabbit was airborne off it, and the thing it had counted on being there simply wasn't. Its jump went wide. It landed clumsy and skidded, and for one breath it was slow. That breath was all I asked for. It's over, I said. Construction, water body. I built the trunk back out of my ribs, right around it, a hollow shaft of wood closing over the rabbit like a fist, and I poured the slime's water into the walls of it as it formed. The trunk filled. Inside that column, the panther rabbit thrashed once, twice, a muffled dark shape churning in water it couldn't climb out of, and then it went still and stopped being a problem and started being supper, a builder fighting by plumbing. Let my brothers with their swords and their gold classes chew on that. I carried it home. Not the whole soaked trunk. I dismantled that on the spot and drank the water and the wood back into me and carried the rabbit. At the house, I knelt over it and used Demolition the way I'd used it on the slime, to take it apart into what I could use. The meat came away clean, more than I could eat in a night, and something else came with it, sliding into place in my head the way the slime's skills had. This one moved, a spring, a lightness, a promise in my legs that I could go up and over things that used to stop me. Jump. The rabbit's whole trick, the thing that had nearly put its fangs in my throat, now folded into me for the taking of it. 2 monsters, 3 skills. 4 days ago, I'd been standing in a marble hall watching my brothers glow gold while a priest emptied the room of any reason to respect me. I got a fire going with the flint and tinder from the pack, salted the meat with the little I had, and cooked it over the flame until it smelled like the best thing in the world, which, that night, it was. There, I said, turning the last of it off the fire. Dinner's ready. I ate it sitting in my own doorway, in a house that healed itself, with a river inside my ribs and a monster's power in my legs. Panther Rabbit turned out to be good. Better than good. I said so out loud, to nobody, with my mouth full. Not bad at all. And for the first time since the throne room, I wasn't grieving a life. I was building one. Somewhere far to the east, a man on a throne had decided I was already dead. He was going to be so wrong about that, and I was going to make sure he lived long enough to know it. But that was later. Tonight, there was fire and meat and 4 walls that were mine, and a forest outside full of monsters that I was starting to see, one by one, as parts I hadn't collected yet. I put my hand flat against the wall and told it to grow a chair, and it did. That was how the 10th day started. Me finding out exactly how far construction would go. A chair, then a second chair, then a table between them with the grain running clean end to end. Plates came out of the same wood, forks too, 4 of them, a little clumsy at the tines. When I tried for a knife with an edge, the skill just sat there and refused. Same with anything shaped like armor. Weapons and blades were the blacksmith's trade, apparently, and my hands weren't a forge. Fine, I could work around that. Windows were the trick I was proud of. I pulled the water body skill I'd taken off the slime and set it into a thin pane in the wall frame, and it hardened into something clear as glass without being glass at all. Light poured in. The house stopped feeling like a burrow. I hung curtains of broad flat leaves, built a bed with a mattress the same soft water set way, then went outside and raised a stove of stacked stone and a proper tub I could boil water in and actually bathe. By dark, I was clean, fed, and sitting in a house that had furniture. 10 days ago, I'd been a boy walking into the trees to die. I looked at the four walls, the fire, the little kingdom of it, and something stupid and bright went off in my chest. I am King Allen, I said to the empty room, and grinned like an idiot, and meant more of it than I wanted to admit. A place that was mine, a place no one could throw me out of. If I could build a house in a forest that wanted me dead, why stop at a house? Why not a wall, and then a road, and then a town, and then something a father on a distant throne would have to hear the name of? A whole kingdom, built by the hands they'd called worthless. I fell asleep planning walls I hadn't needed yet. I found them at the tree line while I was gathering timber, and they found me at the same moment. Two of them, squat, gray-green, knee-high to me, with wet black eyes and mouths too wide for their faces. Goblins. One of them whispered something to the other and dragged a long tongue across its teeth, and I understood the look well enough. They weren't deciding whether to attack. They were deciding how they wanted me cooked. I didn't wait for them to finish the conversation. I dropped my hand, and construction threw up a spike of hardwood straight out of the ground, and in the same breath, I put everything the panther rabbit had given me into my legs. Jump. I came down on the nearer one before it could squeal, drove it onto the point, and it went limp with a sound like a wet cough. The second one was already gone. It didn't fight, didn't hesitate. It turned on its heel and bolted into the deep trees, low and fast. And by the time I'd cleared the spike, it was a rustle, and then nothing. I stood there with my heart slamming, breathing hard, and did the math I did not want to do. Goblins nest in hordes. They don't forgive a dead one, and that runner knew exactly where I lived. That's bad, I said quietly, to no one. That's really bad. I'd built myself a home, and I'd just told an entire army where to find it. So I stopped being comfortable and started being ready. The whole rest of that day, I built a fence. Not a friendly one. A ring of sharpened stakes all the way around the house, shoulder high, points angled out. Behind the house, I dragged in trees with demolition and stood them back up as a solid wall. So anything coming at me had to come from the front, across open ground I could see. One approach, one killing field. Then I went looking for medicine. I knew a fight was coming, and I knew I'd bleed in it. So I combed the undergrowth for healing herbs and found enough to matter. What I couldn't find, anywhere, was an antidote plant. That gap sat in the back of my mind like a cold coin. If the goblins had poison, I'd have no answer for it. I filed it and kept moving, because the fence wasn't enough, and I knew it. A wall only slows an army. To beat one, I needed more than lumber. I needed to be stronger than I was this morning. And in this forest, getting stronger meant going hunting. I spent 2 hours pushing into the dark trees and turning up nothing worth having. A panther rabbit I already had the skill from, a slime, a pill bug the size of an apple, all of them weak, none of them carrying anything I didn't already own. Then the smell changed, sweet and rotten at once, and I found the matango. It was a mushroom that walked, a fat pale cap on 2 stubby legs, taller than me, breathing out little clouds of purple dust as it lurched my way. I didn't like the color of that dust one bit, so I didn't let it get close. I dropped a hardwood stake up out of the earth right under it and drove the thing through before it could fog me, and it came apart in a burst of spores that I was already backing away from. Then demolition on the corpse. 3 things came loose and settled into me at once, and I felt each one arrive like a tool being set in my hand. A poison, a paralysis, a sleep, spore skills, all of them. Each still raw and low, but real. Payloads I could load into anything I built. I stood over the ruined mushroom and started laughing, because I'd walked in here with a fence, and I was walking out with a way to poison an entire charge. I killed a few slimes on the way home for the materials and the auto repair, and somewhere in the middle of it, it happened. Construction and demolition both clicked up a level. I felt the change before I understood it, so I tested it. I built a small doghouse, then reached out and pushed it, and it slid across the ground under my hand, though I hadn't touched a plank of it. I measured the reach carefully, 5 meters. Anything I built or broke, I could move on command inside 5 meters of my own body. I looked at my fence. I looked at my stakes. I thought about 30 goblins standing in one place at once, and the field stopped being a defense in my head and became a machine. All right, I said, flexing my hands. Let's do this. That night, I turned the whole clearing into a trap and then lay awake inside it. I strung spider net across the approach, thin vine tripwires rigged to rattle, an old trick from a life where I'd once scared birds off a garden. I sank stakes into the ground in front of the fence and coated their tips with the poison spore until they glistened wrong in the dark. Behind those, I lined up a rank of longer, heavier stakes, loose in their sockets, each one with a little jump primed inside it, waiting. And I stacked loose stone walls to either side of the killing field, set to hold until I told them not to. Then, I put out the fire, sat with my back to the good wall, and waited. The first night, nothing came. I didn't sleep. Every settling branch was a footstep. Every gust was a horde. Dawn came gray and empty, and I hated it, because it meant they were still out there, still counting, still coming. Goblins hold a grudge, and they'd lost one of their own to me. They weren't going to forget the way home. I spent the daylight resetting every trap I'd sprung on shadows, and I waited for the dark again. The alarm went off at 3 in the morning. Not one rattle, all of them, the whole vine net shaking at once, and I was on my feet before I was awake. I looked out through the water glass, and my stomach dropped. The tree line was moving. Not 2 goblins, about 30 of them, pouring out of the dark in a mob, torches and knives and clubs. And behind them, one bigger than the rest in a battered helmet, barking them forward. They hit the fence first, exactly where I wanted them. The front rank went for the stakes with their bare hands and started climbing, and the poison did its work. Half of them fell straight back off, choking and clawing at their own throats, the spore burning through them before they cleared the points. The rest kept coming anyway. That's when the leader shouted something guttural, and 4 of them peeled off, grabbed a fallen log, and started swinging it into my fence like a battering ram. 10 hits, 15. The stakes cracked and gaps yawned open. "Take this," I said, and sprang the second line. I hit the primed stakes with the last of my jump all at once. They ripped out of their sockets and launched across the field like ballista bolts, a whole volley of them, and tore through the front of the mob. Goblins went down in a row, pinned and folded, and the ones behind stumbled over the ones in front. I was counting under my breath without meaning to. 30 had become 13, then 12, then a number too small to matter, and still they came, because a horde doesn't run, it feeds. Knives came whistling back at me out of the dark, a whole handful of them thrown at once. I threw up a construction wall between us and heard them thud into it and drop, one after another, spent. Behind the wall, I was already reaching for the next thing, but the survivors were through the fence now, close, clubs and spears up, snarling as they came across the open ground straight at me. Too many still to spike, too fast now to fence. I let them come. I let them get close. "Building, level 2, I said, low and cold. "Crush them." The 2 stone walls I'd stacked at the edges of the field, the ones they'd run straight between without ever looking up, I let them go. Level 2 didn't just build, it moved what I'd built. Both walls came down from either side at once, folding inward like a closing hand, right as the pack was bunched tight in the gap between them. The whole charging mass of them vanished under the stone with a sound I felt in my teeth and did not want to hear again. When the dust lifted, there was almost nothing left standing. Almost. The leader had held back, and now it came for me alone. It was fast, and it was smart. A short sword in one hand, a knife in the other, and it moved like it had done this before. It flicked the knife at my eyes to make me flinch, and when my guard came up, it drove the sword low for my gut instead. I twisted, half a second late, and felt the edge open a hot line across my arm. Not deep, but enough to tell me I couldn't trade blows with this thing and live. It circled, patient now, sure it had me, waiting for me to bleed slow and make a mistake. So I didn't give it a blow to trade. I put both hands out and gave it the whole field. Demolition, on the fence, on the fallen stone, on the earth itself. I tore it all apart and construction slammed it back together into one massive fist of packed stone hanging in the air over the field. Then I poured every last drop of jump I owned into it. "Giant stone fist," I said. I launched it. The fist crossed the field faster than the goblin could turn, and it did not survive what came down on it. One heartbeat, there was a helmeted leader mid-lunge, sword raised. The next there was silence, and a crater, and me, standing alone in a yard full of stone and stillness. Arm bleeding, chest heaving, very much alive. A boy with no combat class had just met an army with a built battlefield and won. I didn't cheer. I was too tired, and I didn't trust the quiet yet. I bound my arm with the healing herbs, and then I did the thing that mattered more. I rebuilt. Auto repair closed the gaps in the fence while I fed it broken stakes. Construction stood the ring back up. I restrung every spider net line the way it had been. By the time the sun was full up, the clearing looked almost like it had the morning before, except for the ground, churned and cratered where the walls had come down. Then I crawled under the bed to sleep. Not on it, under it, with a wall of stone at my back, and the alarms live, because 30 goblins had known where I lived, and I couldn't be sure another 30 didn't. I'd held my ground, my first real ground. The forest had sent an army to take back the corner I'd claimed, and the corner was still mine. I closed my eyes thinking about bigger walls. Far to the east, on the same morning, a room full of people who'd thrown me away agreed that I was dead. I found this out later, but I can see it clear enough. The matter of the 9th prince was closed at court, a settled minor thing, the kind nobody wastes a second thought on. A production class boy, they said, sent into Blackfang Forest with a knife. No one survives a night out there unarmed. The exile had done what it was meant to do. They moved on to other business, and Barrett made a show of it. My red-haired brother crowed to anyone who'd listen that the trash prince had finally gotten exactly what he deserved, that the useless one was rotting under the trees where he belonged, and good riddance. He savored it out loud in front of the others, the way you'd savor a win. On his throne, my father let it stand and said nothing, which from him was the same as agreeing. They toasted a death that hadn't happened, and I want you to hold that, the way I hold it, a hall full of people certain I was gone. On the very morning I'd wiped out an army in a forest they thought had eaten me. They had no idea, not yet, but every wall I stacked out there, I was stacking toward the day they'd have to look up from that comfortable little certainty and see exactly what they'd thrown away. I went back to building. 2 days after the raid, I still slept badly, and I dealt with it the way I dealt with everything now. I worked. The goblin bodies were the last mess left in the yard. I laid the leader out on the flat stone by the fence and put my hand on it, not to mourn the thing, but to read it the way demolition let me read anything dead. The mob had given me nothing. Squat monsters. Empty. The leader was different. Something in it came loose under my palm and settled into me. Cool and certain, and I knew 2 new things the way you know your own name. Command. The strength a knight captain hands his men before a charge, except I had no men, only myself. I stepped inside the house and tried it, and my arms felt like someone else's. Heavier, surer. I walked back out into the yard, and it drained away like water through sand. Outside, under the open sky, I could lift a full-grown tree for maybe 10 seconds before it beat me. Inside 4 walls, it stayed. My best trick only worked at home. I filed that away and didn't laugh, though it was the kind of thing my old self would have. The other gift I liked better. Anti-poison. Low and steady. A quiet no against the thing that had scared me most on that fence. I should have been pleased. I'd wiped out an army and come out the other side stronger. Instead, I stood in a yard that no longer needed defending and felt the silence press in. I missed my mother's cookfire. I missed Emily's voice going up when she was worried, which was always. I missed Roland, the one brother who'd bought me 10 minutes and a pack when the rest of them watched me sent off to die. Nobody out here knew my name. Nobody would notice if the forest finally won. I couldn't fix that with a wall. So I did the only thing I could. I picked a direction I'd never walked, south, away from the river and the rocks, and I went to find food and something new to look at. South was worse than home. The trees crowded tighter, the light went the color of pond water, and everything smelled of wet rot. No sane person came this deep. That was the whole point of the place. It was a death trap, and a death trap keeps out anything that wants to live. Which is why the woman stopped me cold. She lay crumpled between 2 roots, one arm flung out like she'd dropped mid-stride. Long brown hair matted to her face, traveler's clothes torn to threads, a scrape of dried blood along one shin. For a second, I thought she was already gone. Then her chest moved, shallow and quick, and I heard the smallest sound come out of her, half a groan. I crouched, and my mind did the thing it always did. It read the sight, and the sight didn't say lost. A lost traveler wanders in circles near the edge and dies where the forest first catches them. This one had come deep, deliberately deep. Her clothes weren't torn by branches. They were worn to nothing by a long, hard run. She hadn't stumbled into Blackfang. She'd fled into it, chosen the forest full of monsters over whatever was behind her, because whatever was behind her was worse, and because it was human enough to stop at the tree line where the monsters begin. Somebody was hunting her. I didn't know a name, didn't know a face. I only knew the thing chasing her had 2 legs and had made a woman decide teeth and rot were the safer bet. She burned under my hand when I touched her forehead. Fever, high and climbing. I could have left her. She was a stranger with a hunter attached to her like a shadow, and I had exactly enough problems already. I looked at her for about the length of one breath. Then I got my arms under her and picked her up. She weighed nothing. I turned north and started the long walk home. I laid her on the bed I'd built, the good one, with the mattress I'd set soft with water body, and got to work the only way I knew how. The healing herbs went into water over the stove. I'm no healer. My medicine is a guess with leaves in it, and I told her so, even though she couldn't hear me. This might do nothing, I said to the burning stranger in my bed, but it's what I've got. Then I built her a pillow out of stored wood and a skin of cool water, shaped it under her neck, and let the chill of it pull the heat off her. I sat back on my heels to watch her breathe, and that was when I saw them. 2 ears, high on her head, tipped in dark fur, twitching at a sound I couldn't catch. And below the torn hem of her clothes, curled loose against the blanket, a tail, full and soft, and unmistakably a fox's. A beast woman. I'd heard of them in the capital, mostly as a slur, mostly as chained servants nobody looked at twice. I'd never stood this close to one. In the world I came from, her ears would have marked her as property. Out here, they marked her as nothing at all, which was, I was starting to think, the kinder arrangement. Her fever broke sometime near dark. The rasp in her breathing smoothed out. The color that had been all wrong in her cheeks settled towards something living. I meant to keep watch. I'd told myself I would, but I hadn't slept right in 3 nights. And the chair was warm, and the last thing I remember is thinking I'd close my eyes for a moment. I woke stiff in the chair to an empty bed. For one bad second, I ran the whole list. She'd robbed me, cursed me, died, and wandered off to do it somewhere else. I was halfway to my feet when the door opened and she came in with the hem of her shirt folded up into a basket full of nuts. "Oh, you're awake," I got out, which was not the composed thing a former prince is supposed to say. She set the nuts down and bowed so low her hair nearly touched the floor. "You saved my life," she said. "I woke and you were sleeping, and I couldn't bear to be a burden without earning it, so I gathered what I could find. Thank you, truly." I told her to sit before she fell over. She sat and folded her hands and watched me with an attention I wasn't used to anymore. Then came the part I'd already decided in my sleep. She asked who I was. "Alan," I said. And then, because a discarded prince is a target and a liability and worth good money to the wrong people, Alan Tyler. For certain reasons, I live out here alone. It came out smooth. Tyler was my mother's name from before the palace, and it fit my mouth like it had always been mine. Not Bloodford. Never Bloodford again if I could help it. Handing over the false name felt less like a lie, and more like setting down something heavy. She gave me her own in return. "I am Fiona, of the Phantom Fox tribe." One hand rose to an ear, self-conscious. "Her people wore illusions to pass in human towns," she explained. Hers had slipped while she lay senseless, which was how I'd seen what I'd seen. I asked the question I already knew the shape of. Why was she out there, alone, deep in a forest that kills people? Her hands tightened. "She was being hunted," she said, "by men. She'd run until the trees swallowed her because they wouldn't follow her in. She didn't give me a name, and I didn't push for one, and neither of us said the obvious thing, that whoever they were still out there, and running into Blackfang isn't the same as getting away. So we were 2 people with a locked door each. I could work with that." "Stay," I said, "as long as you need. There's room, and the forest is quieter with 2. Her eyes went wet and she bowed again and called me Lord Alan. I told her plain Alan was fine. She smiled like I'd said something charming and kept right on calling me Lord Alan anyway. And I let it go because for the first time since a marble hall emptied of respect around me, someone was glad to be in a room with me. Fiona did not know how to sit still, and inside of a week, the house stopped being a shelter and started being a home. Dust I'd stopped seeing was gone. The floor had a shine. My meals, which for months had been meat, and whatever leaves didn't kill me, became pasta with panther rabbit and wild greens. And one evening, a crepe folded around a raspberry sauce that made me set my fork down and just breathe for a second. "Where does a person learn to cook like this?" I asked her, meaning it as a compliment, and half meaning it as a question. She was scrubbing a plate and didn't look up. "I was a maid," she said, "in a great house. The manners come with it. I'm sorry. I know I speak too formally. And the Lord," a small pause, a glance. "That comes with it too. You give off a noble scent, you see, like royalty." I laughed. I laughed a little too fast and a little too loud, and I heard how it sounded even as it left me. "Me? I'm a weirdo who lives in a tree and talks to walls. Nothing noble about that." She looked at me a moment longer than I liked. Then she dipped her head. "My mistake, Lord Alan. Please forget I said it." But my heart was going hard. She'd walked straight up to the one thing I'd buried and sniffed it out through the dirt. A prince of the Progress Kingdom. A kingdom that put collars on her people, sitting across a table from a beast woman he was hiding. If she ever learned the whole of it, I didn't know which way she'd run. So I offered her the only fair trade I had. "Fiona, let's not dig into each other's pasts. Not while we're under one roof. What's behind you is yours. What's behind me is mine." Relief moved across her face so fast I understood she'd been dreading the same conversation from the other side. "Yes," she said, and it was almost a whisper. "Let's do that." 2 locked doors. Agreed to out loud. I felt lighter and more watched than I had in months. Both at once. There was one door I decided to open on purpose. I'd suggested fishing, and we'd walked to the stream, and I'd reached into the store I keep inside my own body and pulled a fishing rod out of nothing. Branch, vine string, a nut for a float, a monster bone hook, snapped together in front of her in the space of a breath. Fiona made a sound I'd never heard a person make. "How did you do that? It came right out of you." I realized I'd never told her what I was, that a whole life had reshaped itself around me, and I'd forgotten to explain the strangest part. So I told her. "My job is architect. I built a chair out of the air while I said it, then a second one, and set them on the bank. Demolition breaks things down and stores them in here. Construction puts them back together as whatever I need. That's the rod. That's the chairs. That's the house you've been cleaning. She circled the chairs like they might vanish. She'd heard of architects, she said, and architects most certainly could not do this. She landed, wide-eyed, on the idea that I had to be descended from some legendary hero, and I told her the truth, that I didn't understand it either, that I was just a man a skill had happened to, and that it was real whether or not it made sense. Amazing, she breathed. Truly amazing, Lord Allen. With this, you could build anything. Nobody had said a word like that to me since my mother and Emily. I turned to the water so she wouldn't see what it did to my face. Then we fished, and it turned into a competition, because everything with Fiona turned into a competition. She was fast. I was faster until I wasn't. In 2 hours, the two of us pulled 56 of the little three-eyed sardines out of that stream. Nothing in this forest is ordinary. The fish have a spare eye. The snails on the rocks have teeth, but a fish is still a fish, and 56 of them meant dinner and then some. We packed the catch and turned for home, the afternoon soft and gold, both of us grinning like idiots. It was the first easy day I'd had since a priest said the word architect and my father didn't rise from his throne. The forest told me before my eyes did. It started with the quiet. Fiona was still talking, still bright, and I put a hand up and she stopped. Then I saw why the back of my neck had gone cold. Prints in the soft earth, too big and too many. Branches snapped at chest height. Long pale scratches raked down a tree trunk, deliberate. The way an animal marks a road it means to own, not random. Something had walked this path knowing it was ours. They came out of the trees without a hurry, which was the worst part. 1, then 3, then more than I wanted to count, sliding out of the shadows on either side until they'd made a ring and we were the middle of it. Tall as a man on their hind legs, gray and rangy, jaws already parted. Wolves, but wrong. Bigger, smarter, moving together like they'd rehearsed it. Werewolves, pack hunters, everything the goblins had been, and a rung up the ladder from them in every way that mattered. I'd fought 30 goblins behind a wall I'd spent days building. Here I had a stream at my back, a bucket of fish, and a woman who trusted the wrong forest to keep her safe. She pressed close to my shoulder, and I felt her go rigid. "Get behind me, Fiona," I said, and put my body between her and the nearest set of teeth. The circle tightened. Somewhere in the low chorus of growls, I heard the day I'd just had end, and something else begin. The circle of teeth pulled tight, and before I could move, Fiona stepped in front of me. "No, please leave this to me, Lord Allen." She pressed her palms flat together, and her hands changed. Her copy skill did the work in a heartbeat, borrowing the shape of the thing that wanted to eat us. The claws that slid from her fingers were the pack's own claws, curved and gray. Then she was gone off the ground. The first werewolf came apart before it understood she had moved. She dropped low under the second and opened its flank. A third lunged and she was already behind it. 8 of them, tall as men on their hind legs, and she cut through them like she had something to prove. "Did you see that, Lord Allen?" she called, landing light. "That's the 4th one." I did see it. That was the problem, because the other 4 just watched. A pack hunts together. I had learned that on this same path an hour ago, reading the snapped branches and the claw-marked trunk, the way they had stalked us like one animal with 8 bodies. Now their own were dying in front of them, and not one moved to help. No snarl of grief, no panic. They stood in the amber light with their heads slightly cocked, and when I looked hard at their eyes, I saw why my skin had been crawling since the circle closed. Their eyes were glass beads, wet and round and empty. Nothing lived behind them. "Fiona," I said, and my voice came out wrong. "Get away from the ones you've already..." Too late. A werewolf she had gutted, a body that should have been meat on the dirt, folded its legs under itself and rose. It kicked her square in the back before she could turn. She went down hard, the borrowed claws scattering off her hands, a scrape of blood bright on her arm. I had her by the collar and hauled her clear of the next set of jaws in the same breath. Dead things do not get back up. These did, which meant they were never alive to begin with. I put my hand on the ground and told it to give me walls. Construction answered the way it always did. Without asking questions, the world had stopped answering for me. Timber came up out of nothing, 4 walls and a roof around us in the space of a breath, and the jaws outside met wood instead of skin. Fiona pressed against me in the sudden dark, breathing hard. There was one gift in the walls. Out in the open, my command skill was worthless. A knight captain's battle buff that drained away in the outdoors almost the instant I called it. Good for 10 seconds and a lifted tree, no more. But 4 walls made a home, and a home was where command finally had teeth. I felt the strength settle into me like a held breath. I might need it. "They're not real," Fiona whispered. "Are they, Lord Allen? They came back. Puppets." I kept my eyes on the walls, on the places starting to shudder. "Something's driving them. It lets you win to pull you in close. The strings aren't here. Whoever's holding them is." The wood boomed. A clawed arm punched through a seam beside my head, then another through the far wall. The house would not hold. It had never been meant to. Hiding solved nothing anyway. As long as the hand behind the strings sat somewhere in the trees, it would keep sending bodies until one of them got through. So I would stop giving it a house to break. I would give it something else. Fiona, I crouched and put my mouth close to her ear so she would hear me over the splintering. I'm going to take the house down. When it goes, lie flat and don't lift your head. I have an idea. Trust me. Her fox ears were flat with fear, but she nodded. Understood. I took the house apart. Demolition pulled every plank and beam back into me at once. One instant there were walls, the next there was open sky and a heap of loose stakes where the roof had been. Fiona dropped flat. The puppets, braced to smash through wood, lurched forward into empty air. I gave the loose wood to construction and primed it with jump. The stakes launched off the ground like the forest had spat them, and they took the werewolves through the chest, the shoulder, the throat, pinning the whole ring of them to the trees behind. They thrashed on the points and did not bleed the way a living thing bleeds. I walked to the nearest one and laid my hand on it and told Demolition to take it apart. An animal cannot be dismantled. I had tried once and the skill simply refused, the way it always refuses the living. This one came apart in my hands like a chair, fur to fiber, muscle to loose material, the whole shape unstitching into a little pile of parts. It had never been a wolf. It had been a costume, and in the middle of the pile, something small squirmed out of where the skull had been. A centipede, pale and glistening, no longer than my finger, legs working in a furious ripple as it tried to burrow back into the dirt. A child. The thing that had crawled in through the ear and worn the corpse like a coat. There were more of them, spilling from the other husks, scattering. I set my boot down over the nearest cluster, not quite crushing, and raised my voice to the trees. Come out, I said, flat and clear, or your children die. The forest went still. Then the ground began to move. She came up out of the earth all at once, and she was enormous. The mother, pale segments the color of a drowned thing, each one wide as a doorway, a body long enough to wrap around an inn and still have length to spare. Legs raked the dirt in their hundreds. Where her head lifted into the last of the light, I saw the mandibles, and I understood every glass bead eye at once. This was the hand, and the werewolves had only ever been her fingers. Behind me, Fiona scrambled up, all her courage gone white. Lord Allen, we have to run. Her hands shook. It's impossible. Even I, a battle class, can't win this. Please, stay behind me. I was already turning to the trees. Don't worry, I'll finish this quickly. I put both hands against the trunks on either side of the path, old oaks, thick as pillars, and I told them what to become. This was the thing my father's court had branded worthless. A production class. Something to be kept behind the real soldiers and protected, they said, if it was worth keeping at all. I had stopped believing them somewhere back in the dark. The trees answered. I felt construction reach into them and take hold the way it took hold of everything dead and standing, and I made them bend. Bark split lengthwise and peeled back and reknit smooth. The two oaks leaned toward each other over the path and fused where they touched, wood pouring into wood with a heat I could feel through my palms. The joined trunk drawing itself long and flat, thinning, the grain lining up straight as a drawn bowstring. I pushed harder. One face flattened to a blade back. The other narrowed and narrowed until it ran to an edge you could shave with. It groaned the whole way, a low tearing sound, like a ship coming apart in a storm, and the last of the leaves shivered down around me in a slow green rain. When it stopped, a single sword hung balanced above the path, longer than the mother's whole body. Its edge, one pale, unbroken seam of raw heartwood. She came at me. All those hundreds of legs found the ground at once, and she poured down the path like a flood with a mouth on the front of it, mandibles wide enough to take me whole. I did not lift the sword with my arms. No man alive could have. I lifted it the way I lift anything I build. Construction took the whole crushing weight of two grown oaks off my shoulders and held it steady in the air over the path. And when she was close enough that I could smell the wet rot of her, I brought it down where I pointed. The blade fell through the last of the amber light and met her just behind the head. The whole path jumped under my boots. The edge went through the first pale segment and did not slow. It drove down her length the way an axe drives through a log, splitting her open the whole way, folding the great body flat against the earth under the dead weight of the trees. Dirt fountained. The shriek that had been climbing and climbing out of her throat cut off between one instant and the next, snuffed like a candle. Dust rolled over both of us in a wall. I stood in it with my hands still raised, feeling the sword settle, and I waited. When the dust thinned, she was a broken pale line across the path, and not one of those hundreds of legs so much as twitched. You picked the wrong prey, I said, to the thing that could no longer hear me. The children knew before I did. All along the ruined husks, the small pale shapes let go at once. pouring out of the dead wolves and vanishing into the leaf litter. Gone the instant their mother stopped holding the strings. The path emptied. The growls were finished. It was just the two of us and the wind coming back through the trees. Then Fiona hit me like the third werewolf had hit her, except her arms went around my ribs instead of my spine. Amazing! I knew it! You really are a hero! She pulled back, eyes shining, and I saw the color climb up her face as fast as it came. You've saved me again. I thought I'd finally be able to repay you, and instead, you held 8 of them off your own, I said, which was true, and left it there, because she looked like she might catch fire if I said more. I knelt at the mother's ruined head and laid my hand on it and let demolition do its slow, thorough work. She gave me a great deal. Most of it settled into the store I never see, weightless and waiting. But one thing came up bright and strange and new, a skill for holding the dead the way she had held them. Puppeteer. The exact power that had nearly killed us, now sitting in my own hands. There was something uneasy in that, and I chose not to look at it too closely yet. And 2 skills I already carried ticked over as I worked. Construction and demolition both, up to level 3. Something I had never had before came with it. I could touch a thing now and set the moment it would build or come apart. Hold the command in it for as long as a full day and let it trigger when I chose. I banked that quietly, the way I banked everything. Every skill I took was one more wall between me and the boy who had been marched to the tree line with a knife and told not to come back. Back home, I tried the new power on the smallest thing I could find, a scrap of wood on the table. I gave it to Puppeteer and it crawled, flexing along the boards like a centipede feeling its way, obedient as a hand. Then, I tried it on a dead panther rabbit I'd kept for its meat, and the stiff thing sat up, ears twitching, and hopped where I told it to hop and stopped where I told it to stop. Not alive, just moved. I had become, in the space of an afternoon, a little bit of the thing I'd crushed on the path, and I decided I could live with that if it kept us breathing. Fiona hovered at the edge of the lamplight, twisting her hands, until she finally worked up the nerve. Lord Allen, may I have a moment? She would not look at me. I'm so sorry to ask, but it would help if you could build a toilet. I had forgotten, truly forgotten. I had raised walls and fences and fishing rods out of the ground, and it had never once crossed my mind that people need somewhere to go. Sorry, I said, already reaching for the floor. I'll build one right now. I gave her a proper seat, the Western kind they had in the capital, and I dug a pit beneath it. Then I dropped a dead scavenger slime into the pit and put it under Puppeteer, and I set it to do the one thing scavenger slimes are born to do. She peered in when I waved her over, and I dropped a leaf to show her. The slime took it, folded it in, and was still again, waiting. It follows my commands, I told her, so it will never touch you. It just works. Never complains either. Her ears went straight up. This is how, come to think of it, I never told you. I straightened. I can take the skills of any monster I take apart. That's how I lifted the sword. It's where Puppeteer came from. Off the mother, on the path. She stared at me, her mouth opened. And then Fiona, who had faced down 8 werewolves that afternoon without running, quietly folded up and fainted onto the clean-swept floor. I crouched to catch her too late, and I understood, honestly. If someone had told me a year ago what I could do now, I think I'd have gone down too. A week after Fiona moved in, I finally asked the question I'd been swallowing. We were doing laundry. I pulled clean water out of the air the way demolition let me now. She wrung out the shirts, and it was such an ordinary morning that I almost let it go. But I still didn't know who she was running from, and a man who lives in a forest that eats people learns to ask. I told her I wasn't prying to be cruel. I only wanted to know if there was somewhere she needed to be, somewhere I could help her reach. She went still. Then she went down. Fiona dropped to her knees in the wet grass and begged me to let her stay. She'd been hunted, she said, the words falling over each other. She'd used teleport magic to run, and it had thrown her here, into the one forest nobody walks out of, and there was no way back and no home left at the other end of it. Please, she said, I'll do anything. I'll earn my place. Just don't send me out there. That was when I understood. She thought the question was me showing her the door. That's not what I meant. I crouched down to her level so she'd have to look at me. I'm not sending you anywhere. Stay as long as you want. Stay for good, she cried then. The loose, relieved kind of crying that only comes out of a person who's been holding their breath for years. I didn't know the whole of her past, and I decided I didn't need it. Someone I could actually talk to beat the monsters 100 times over, and she wasn't a criminal. She was just one more person the world had thrown out, same as me. Now that she was staying, we showed each other what we could do. Fiona's magic ran to trickery. She turned her forearms into gray werewolf claws, doppelganger, she called it, and opened a standing timber like it was a loaf of bread. She split into 5 copies with Mirage style and crushed a boulder under all of them at once. Then she blurred across the clearing with Speedstar and was suddenly right there in front of me, grinning, close enough that I stepped back. "You're a real magic warrior," I told her, and I meant it. Her tribe traded raw power for misdirection, she explained, ears flicking, pleased with herself. For the first time since the ceremony that ruined my life, it felt like someone was standing at my back instead of behind me. Then I looked at my one-room log cabin and decided it wasn't enough anymore. We argued about the new one the whole way to the quarry. I wanted a fortress, something that could stare down a dragon. She wanted something fashionable she could show off to friends she didn't have yet. I gave in on the trimmings. She scored the rock face with those borrowed claws, and I laid my hands flat against the stone and let demolition swallow it, load after load, until I was carrying 9 cartloads of quarry inside my own body and couldn't feel the weight of any of it. Construction had climbed to level 4 by then. Standing there full of stone, I caught myself thinking a strange thought, that a house with that much behind it didn't necessarily have to keep its feet in one place. I filed it away. It wasn't time for that yet. I raised the new house around the old cabin in a single afternoon, 2 stories, walls thick as a keep's, but scaled down to the size of a cozy inn, so it never felt like a barracks. Downstairs, I set a real kitchen and a broad fireplace. Into my own walls, where she'd never see them, I built hidden things. Stakes primed with construction, traps I could wake with one touch, because a home that can't defend itself isn't a home, it's bait. My own room I kept plain. A bed, a desk, a wardrobe, nothing more. I couldn't have told you why at the time. Something about keeping one room that still remembered the boy who used to have a family. Her room I did not keep plain. I gave Fiona a ceiling of glowstone that held a little light after dark, so she'd never wake in the black. I gave her a bed set with water body, soft the way water is soft, and a wardrobe of pale fine wood, and a carpet and a window. A real window, with real glass, looking out over the tops of the trees. She stopped in the doorway and said nothing for a moment, which, for Fiona, was its own kind of noise. Then she went in and touched everything. The wardrobe, the sill, the light. The way a person checks that something is really allowed to be theirs. "No one's ever made something for me before," she said. "Not given, made." I told her the window faced east so she'd catch the morning. I didn't tell her I'd spent 3 days on a room I could have thrown up in an hour, or that somewhere in those 3 days the reason I was building had quietly stopped being about survival. I didn't have the word for it yet. I only knew I wanted her to have a window. We took to sitting outside when the day's work was done. One night, she noticed the old scars across my back and asked, gentle, whether the monsters had done that to me. They hadn't. They were from sword drills in the capital, from a childhood spent trying to be worth something to a man who was never going to grant it. But I couldn't say that without saying the rest, without saying prince and exile, and the name I'd buried out here. So I told her it was just hard training, long ago, and let her believe it. We looked up at the sky instead, and each of us, clumsy about it, thanked the other for the day we'd met. I told her I was glad the forest had thrown her at me of all people. Before she went inside, she leaned over and kissed my cheek, quick, and was through the door before I could think of a single thing to say back. I stayed out a while longer. Not so long ago, I had stood in this same forest with a knife in my hand, deciding whether there was any reason left to keep going. I had my answer now, and it slept one wall away from me with a window facing east. Then we became farmers, which no one who'd watched my father crown my brothers would ever have believed of me. Hunting was luck, and I was tired of living on luck. Fiona had spotted potato leaves out near the quarry, so we dug up the tubers beneath them, purple, ugly, studded with little eyes like a squid's. I named them squid potatoes on the spot, ran my anti-poison over a fried batch, ate the first bite myself, and found them good, fluffy, and strange and good. We cleared a broad plot and worked it into ridges. I carved my own hoe and plow by hand, since construction stubbornly refused to make me anything shaped like a weapon, and I walked a dead werewolf behind us under puppeteer to haul and press the rows. An old farmer had taught me the trick of it years back. I never once thought I'd have a use for it. Fiona plowed at my side in bursts of Speedstar and kept telling me to have more confidence in myself, and we walked home holding hands with dirt to our elbows, and I let myself believe the ground might actually give something back. It gave more than I asked. In 1 month, we pulled up a crop that had no business coming in under 3. An armored boar came crashing through for the harvest, and I put it down and took its charge and its keen nose to add to my collection. Then I fenced the whole field, stood the dead wolf at the gap as a guard, and after that, nothing touched the rows. Half a year in the forest, and I had a home, a field, a partner, and a wall between me and everything that had ever thrown me away. Some nights, I turned that over. I could stay here. I could let the quiet of Blackfang close over the two of us and let my father and my brothers live and die, never once knowing I'd made it, never knowing they'd been wrong. It would have been so easy to just vanish into being happy. I'll be honest, part of me wanted exactly that. Winter settled the argument for me. It came down hard, snow to the knee, blizzards that leaned on the double windows all night long. The river locked solid. We'd stocked for it, nuts and dried squid potatoes hauled in by the dead things I kept, water put by with demolition so nothing spoiled, Boerfer blankets, a fire I never let die. And then there was nothing to do but wait it out, the two of us, inside 4 warm walls while the world went white and silent. Long days beside a fire do something to two people who have been carefully not saying a thing. To kill an afternoon, I asked whether Doppelganger could change more than her hands, and Fiona laughed and turned it into a game, shifting one outfit into the next, while I called out which ones I liked, both of us warm and easy, and entirely at home in it. She caught me watching her once, and told me I'd had a funny look on my face for a while now. I didn't have an answer for her. I was just happy, in a way I hadn't been since before a priest said the word that emptied a whole room of respect for me. It came to a head on a still night under a full moon, deep in the cold. I won't lay out what passed between us there. Some things a man keeps. I'll only say that the careful distance we'd both been holding on to finally closed, and that when it did, neither of us was a master or a servant or a stray anymore. We were two people who had chosen each other and had, at last, said so out loud. When the thaw came and the snow pulled back off the field, we stepped out into it together. "Spring's here, Alan," she said, squinting into the light. "We made it through," I told her, together. And I meant the winter, and I meant a good deal more than the winter. I didn't hear about any of this until much later. But that same winter, far to the west, the world I'd been thinking about hiding from quietly began to think about me. It started as a traveler's story. Hunters and traders working the edge of Blackfang carried it out with them. That deep in the Death Forest, where nothing living is supposed to last a week, someone had built a fortress, walls, fields, a household, and that the thing behind those walls might be the trash prince the King of Progress had thrown away to die. A boy the whole court had long since written off as bones under the leaves. They laughed it off the first time. No one survives Blackfang. That was simple fact, and my father had built his clean conscience on it. But the story kept coming back, the way a story does when it happens to be true. They tell me my father stood in his hall and called it nonsense, and that, for once, the word didn't sit right in his mouth. For the first time since he'd stripped my name and pointed me at the trees, the iron certainty that he'd been right to cut a weak branch off his line took a single hairline crack. He had called me a disappointment in front of everyone he ruled. Now that word had started very quietly to rot. And Barrett, the brother who'd laughed loudest the day they marched me out, felt the old envy stir cold in his gut. He scoffed to the room that the trash prince was long dead. But the thought that I might not be, that the boy they had all stepped over might be out there raising something not one of them could match, got its hooks in him and would not let go. Nothing came of it yet. No one saddled a horse. No one spoke my name to my face. It was only the first crack, the first thread of doubt in a story a whole court had been telling itself to sleep at night. But a crack is how everything else gets in, later. I was in my forest, warm, fed, in love, and knowing none of it. And the reckoning I hadn't even let myself decide to want had, without me, quietly begun. The morning the disaster came, I taught my house to walk. The snow had gone off in the night, so I was back in the field before breakfast, plowing fresh ridges and pressing the half-cut potatoes down into the black earth. A month and a half and they'd be ready. That was the pace of my life now, measured in harvests instead of hours, and I'd stopped bracing for the next bad thing. Both my skills had climbed a rung over the winter. Construction had reached level 4, and demolition with it. The new trick under demolition was plain enough. I could pack spare stone and timber into the walls of a building now instead of hauling it around inside my own body. 6 cartloads of it filed away where I could actually keep track of what I owned. The new trick under construction was not plain at all. I laid my hand on the fortress and told it to stand up. It did. 4 thin legs pushed out of the foundation and lifted the whole 2-story house off the ground, swaying there like a startled deer on stilts. Fiona came around the corner with the teapot and stopped dead. "I'm sorry, Alan," she said, looking at the legs the way you'd look at a spider in the soup. "But this is one skill I really can't stand." I told her to look closer, that it was kind of cute. She did not agree, and she had a point I couldn't argue with either. If I actually walked the thing anywhere, it would flatten the whole garden under those feet. I set the house back down on its foundation and let the legs sink away. Filed it, the way I'd filed the idea the first time. Not yet. We took our tea outside in the sun. She turned the tin over and frowned that the leaves were nearly gone, so we made a plan for the morning after. A walk out past the ridges to forage wild ones. A packed lunch, the whole day if the weather held. A picnic. I remember thinking, with the cup warm in my hands and her tail curled against my knee, that I had finally built something no one could take. Then the ground moved. It wasn't a shiver. It was the whole forest lurching sideways at once. The tea went over. I grabbed Fiona and we went under the outdoor table together as the cups walked off the boards and smashed and the timbers of the house groaned above us. It ran on far longer than any quake I'd ever felt, a deep grinding roll that came up through my teeth, and then it stopped all at once, the way a held breath stops. We came out into a wrongness. The birds had gone up, not a flock. Every bird in Blackfang, a black tide of them pouring south over the tree line all at the same time, screaming, none of them looking back. Under that noise, the forest had gone dead quiet in a way I'd never heard it, and I realized the smaller things were running too, low and fast through the underbrush, all in one direction. Then I saw where they were running from. Far off to the north, past the canopy, a pillar of fire stood up out of the world, orange, enormous, roaring straight into the sky like something had punched a hole down to the center of the earth and let it out. It did not flicker and go. It held. Stay by the house, I told her. Fiona had gone pale, her ears flat to her skull. I didn't wait to feel afraid. I put my hands to the woodpile and stacked bundle on bundle straight up, the old trick, a tower of logs climbing fast under my palms until it stood higher than the tallest trees. Then I went up it hand over hand to see what had emptied a forest. From up there, I could see for miles, and I wished I couldn't. The fire pillar had a base. At the foot of it, moving, was a thing the size of a hill that had decided to get up and walk. Red, burning red, every scale of it catching the light like a coal, and long, longer than any living creature had a right to be. Better than 20 meters from the great horned head to the lash of the tail. It came on through the forest without hurry, and the forest simply stopped existing where it passed. I watched it lower its head into the tree line and take a swath of century oaks the way a man takes a mouthful of grass. I watched a boar the size of a wagon brake cover ahead of it, running for its life, and I watched the red head dip once, and the boar was gone, swallowed whole, and the thing never even broke stride. That was the pillar of fire. That was every bird in the forest going south at once. It breathed, and where it breathed, the world burned. The sound reached me a beat behind the sight, a low grinding roll, half a landslide and half something alive, the noise the earth would make if it decided to hunt. I stood on my tower of logs and felt every board of it shrink to what it was, kindling. I had spent a year learning to read this forest the way I read a building site. This holds, this gives, this I can use. I looked at that thing on the horizon and read nothing. There was no seam in it, no weak wall, no load I could turn against itself. It was the first problem I had ever seen that I could not take apart in my head. I knew what it was the way you know a word in your own language. There were tiers to the monsters out here, and then there was a rung above all of them that most people lived their whole lives never seeing, because the ones who saw it did not come back to describe it. A superclass, a red dragon. In the stories, they called this one Flame Maw, and I had always thought it was a story. It was walking. That was the only mercy in any of it. A thing with a back like that surely had wings, and it had chosen, for reasons of its own, to come on foot. It was coming south. South was the birds. South was the ridges, and the field, and the packed lunch we'd never eat. South was my house, with Fiona standing under it, waiting for me to climb back down and tell her it was nothing. I climbed down and told her the truth, because she'd earned the truth. A superclass red dragon, 20 meters of it, eating everything between the fire and us, and walking our way. Fiona didn't fall apart. She went straight to the plan, fast and flat. The voice of someone who'd survived by knowing when to run. "We could go now," she said. "We take what we can carry, and we go, and we don't stop." It was superclass. A full party with a paladin at the front, and a great sage at the back couldn't put that thing down. So there was no fight here, only a head start, and we were wasting it. Every word of it was right. That was the worst part. The sane thing, the thing that kept us both breathing past sundown, was to leave the house and the field and the room with the east window, and be two small figures running south with everything else that could still run. I didn't move. "Fiona," I said her name, and then I couldn't find the next part for a second, because I was looking at the door I'd built her, and the window behind it that faced the morning, the first thing anyone had ever made for her. "I want to run too. You should know that. I'm not brave, I just did the math, and the math says run." She waited. Her hand had found my sleeve. "But if we run from this, we run from the next one, and the one after. We spend the rest of our lives small and fast, and looking over our shoulders, living in fear of anything bigger than us. And I've done that." The word came up out of the cold place, the one the ceremony left, The day a hall full of people I was related to decided I was nothing, and I walked out into this forest without a fight. I let them throw me away once because I was too weak to stand in the door. I built this so I'd never have to do it again. If I run out that door now, then they were right about me. I'd rather be wrong here, with you, than right somewhere safe. I made myself say the rest of it plainly. I want to fight. I want to win. I want to tell you I said all that and felt strong. I didn't. My hands were shaking the whole time, and some cold, sensible part of me was screaming that I was about to get the only person left who wanted me killed for a pile of wood and a window. A house is a thing. You can build another house. You cannot build another Fiona. I knew that, standing there, and I chose the house anyway. Not because the house was worth her, but because running from it would kill something in me that couldn't be rebuilt at all. The boy who walked out of that marble hall without a word had run once. I had promised him he'd never run again. That promise was the only wall I had that a dragon couldn't touch. For a long moment, she just looked at me, and I could see her doing her own math, and I could see the exact instant she set it down and chose me over it. Her ears came up, her tail steadied. "All right," she said, quiet, and then steadier. The fear folded down under something harder. "You pulled me out of the snow and I had nothing left. My life's been yours since then, anyway." She managed something almost like her old teasing smile, and it broke my heart a little. "I'll stay, even to the end." I pulled her in and held her, once, hard, and said the only thing worth saying, "Thank you." Then I let her go, because gratitude doesn't build a wall, and we had, by my count, about 12 hours. I didn't try to outmuscle a dragon. I couldn't. I set out to outbuild it, and I had until nightfall to do it. One wall wouldn't stop that thing. It would walk through a wall the way it walked through the oaks. So I didn't build one wall. I built 4. I put my hands flat to the biggest trees north of us and let demolition take them whole, trunk and root, felling 100 years of forest in an afternoon and pouring it into my store. Then construction gave it back as barriers. 4 fence lines strung across the dragon's path, each one 50 meters behind the last, so the ground between the house and the beast became a gauntlet instead of a doorstep. Every yard it gained, it would have to pay for 4 separate times. Fiona worked beside me and didn't slow down once. She scored timber with her claws to my measure, hauled, braced, asked what came next before I'd finished the last thing. Between the lines, I raised catapults, squat and heavy, and I couldn't shape a weapon with construction. It has never once let me make a thing meant only to kill, so I shaped ammunition instead. Round stones, packed with the spores I'd taken off the mushroom thing a season back. Poison in one batch, paralysis in the next, sleep in the last. If steel couldn't cut that hide, maybe I could put the whole world to sleep underneath it. I called up the dead. The werewolf corpses I'd kept under puppeteer came up stiff out of the cold store and took their orders without a sound. 2 of them I sent loping north as scouts, out past the first line into the dark to be my eyes. And the other 6, I stood in a rank at the back to work the catapults, and to put their dead bodies between the dragon and Fiona if it came to that. They didn't fear it. It was the one advantage I had. You can't frighten a thing that's already dead. The light went while I worked. Afternoon burned down to a red dusk, dusk to full dark, and I stopped being able to feel my own hands somewhere in there and just kept building past them. The scouts sent back what they saw the way puppeteer let them. The dragon was closer, then closer, chewing its way south one grove at a time, and every report was a clock striking. I stopped counting the hours and started counting the fences left to finish. Fiona lit torches down the lines so I could see to work. Neither of us said the thing we were both thinking, which was that all of it, every wall and stone and dead soldier, might buy us minutes and nothing more. And last, when the light was almost gone, I went back to the house. I'd told Fiona I hated walking it. I lied to myself about that as much as to her. I laced the timbers with everything the slimes had ever given me. The mend that closes a wound in the wood as fast as it opens. The water that runs through the walls to drink a dragon's fire. I studded the whole outer shell with sharpened logs until the home I'd made looked like a thing with its hackles up. I mounted a heavy ballista on the roof and rigged it so I could loose it from inside without ever showing my face. And then, in the dark, I gave it back its 4 legs and let it stand. Not a house anymore. A fortress that could walk to the fight. Fiona watched it rise on its feet against the firelit sky, the thing she'd sworn she couldn't stand, and this time she didn't say a word against it. 12 hours after the ground first moved, I stood at the last line and watched the north catch fire. We were set. Fiona at my shoulder, her claws already out. The 6 dead things ranged along the catapults, stones loaded, spore dust sealed and waiting. The fortress up on its legs behind us, breathing water through its walls, the ballista aimed over our heads into the dark. 4 fences between us and the thing coming, and a killing floor between each one. Everything I had, everything I'd built in a year of a forest trying to eat me, stacked into one last argument. Then the far trees lit red, and it came out of them. Up close it was worse than the horizon had promised. The heat rolled ahead of it in a wave I felt on my face from 100 yards out, and the light came off its scales like an open forge, and the ground kept time with its feet, one deep drum stroke at a time, unhurried, certain. It had eaten its way across half of Blackfang, and it was not full. It fixed the first fence with an eye like a coal and did not slow. I had built for a whole year to feel like this, to stand somewhere and not be moved out of it. I had told myself the walls were about safety. Standing there watching the forge come toward my fences, I finally understood they'd never been about safety at all. Safety was south, with the birds. The walls were about being a man who got to decide where he stood. My father decided I was nothing and put me out a door. Tonight, a monster the size of a story would try to put me out of the last door I had. I meant to make it the hardest thing either of them ever did. Beside me, Fiona's breath had gone tight and quick. I found her free hand with mine, once, and squeezed, and let go so we'd both have our hands. Whatever happens, I said, low, not looking away from it. We made it through the winter. We made it through all of it. This is just one more thing in the forest. It was the largest lie I had ever told. She knew it too. She laughed anyway, a small cracked sound, and set her feet. The red head lowered. The first fence, the thing I'd felled 100 years of trees to raise, stood up bright in that furnace glow. My outermost wall, the first of 4, the beginning of the only answer I had left. And Flame Maw reached it. The first stone left the catapult before Flame Maw finished its step. I had packed those stones myself through the night, each one hollowed and filled to the seam with spore dust, poison, paralysis, sleep, everything the walking mushroom had ever given me, and I loosed the whole line of them at once. They burst against the dragon's face in blooms of purple that swallowed its head whole. For one breath, I let myself hope. It walked through them. It breathed in a lungful of poison that would have dropped a bear where it stood, and it did not so much as slow its stride. Then it opened its mouth, and the night went white. Its breath came down the lane like a river that had caught fire. The first fence, everything I had, felled a lifetime of trees to raise, went to ash between one heartbeat and the next, and the catapults with it, the ropes gone, the frames gone, nothing left but a black smear where my outermost wall had stood. The heat reached me 50 meters back and dried my eyes in my head. So the barrier meant nothing. Fine. I had never expected it to stop the thing. It was there to bleed it, to slow it, to teach me where it was soft. And it had already told me one true thing. I could not fight this from the front. Doppelganger. Fiona was moving before the word finished. She went low and fast along the dragon's flank, and the last of my werewolf puppets peeled off the other way, the two of them splitting so the beast could not watch both at once. Her hands were not hands anymore. She had borrowed the wolf's long curved claws, and she dragged them across the soft place under its jaw, where the scales thinned down to the size of coins. The puppet took the far side of its throat. 4 lines of red opened on a body that had never once in its life been marked. I felt the shock of it roll off the dragon like a change in the weather. It had been bored. That was the thing I understood, crouched there in the dark reading it. This was a creature that had never lost, that thought of us the way you think of ants underfoot, and it had come here bored and hunting for something that could finally make it feel a fight. Now, something had scratched it, and it was not bored anymore. It was insulted. That was my window. 3 days back, I had pushed a seed into the soil of that lane and grown nothing from it on purpose. Construction, waiting, an order folded up small and left to sleep. I gave the order now. The tree came up out of the ground beneath the dragon's belly like a spear the length of a ship's mast, straight up into the one part of the beast that never turned to face an enemy. It screamed, the first sound I had heard it make. Then it burned the world, the tree, the puppet, the very ground they had stood on. It turned in a wheel of flame and erased all of it, and the corpse that had marched at my side since the werewolf pack went up without so much as a body left to fall. The heat came at me like a house falling outward. Speed Star, hold on to me. Fiona hit me at the shoulder and the world smeared sideways. One instant, I was in the open with fire climbing toward my face. The next, she had carried the both of us through my own door, and there was stone between me and the light. She set me down inside, breathing hard, her claws still out, her ears flat to her skull. Outside, the dragon found the building I had been standing in front of. I could not see its face from in here. I did not need to. I could feel the contempt in the way it came for us, unhurried, certain, a thing that had decided we had crawled into a box to die, and meant to step on the box until it stopped moving. It thought the walls were a coffin. It charged. More than 20 meters of dragon hit my home at a dead run, inside 4 walls, which was where I had to be because the buff only ever worked in here. Command woke and put its weight under me and Fiona both, and the house rose to meet the charge. The wall took the dragon's skull and gave. That was the whole trick of it, the thing I had been building toward without knowing the shape of the enemy. The wall did not stand rigid to be shattered. It stretched. The slime worked into the stone, let the whole face of it bow inward, like the skin of a drum, and throw the dragon back onto its heels. And where its claws had raked long gouges down the surface, the cracks were already sealing, knitting themselves shut as fast as the beast could open them. It bit down. Its fangs went into the wall to the gum, and the wall closed around them and held. For one long moment, the strongest thing in the forest was stuck fast to a cottage, like a fly caught in sap, hauling its whole head back and getting nowhere. And I laughed once, short and ugly, before I remembered to use the moment. I swung the log. I had hung a whole tree along the side of the house on a hinge shaped out of raw wood, and I brought it around now the way a man brings a maul down on a wedge. It cracked across the dragon's horned head and knocked it staggering sideways. Before it could set its feet, the house came off all 4 legs at once, leapt, the entire home in the air, stone and log and roof, and me inside it, and drove the log into the beast the way a bull puts its horns through a gate. That bought the half second I had built the roof for. The ballista up top was already cranked and loaded, and I fired it from inside without ever once showing my face. The whole thing rigged so I could loose it from behind the walls. The bolt was as long as I am tall, and the head of it had been soaking in every poison I owned since the sun went down. It punched into the dragon's right eye and stayed there. That was the second scream. Worse than the first, because there was something new under it now. Something the beast had never had cause to make before. The dragon reared straight up off the ground, blind down one whole side, past fury now into something with no plan left inside it at all. I saw its throat swell. I saw the light come climbing up the length of its neck. It was going to breathe fire straight down at point blank on the thing that had dared to hurt it, close enough that the flame would take the house and everything folded up inside it. And never mind that the beast was standing on the very same ground, which meant that, for one breath, every ounce of its weight had gone up onto its hind legs, and every ounce of mine was resting on the one skill I had held back all night. I dismantled the ground. I had spent the whole night before the dragon ever arrived with a hole in my mind. While it was still only a fire on the northern horizon, Fiona and I had been down under this clearing in the dark, and demolition had eaten the earth out from beneath the exact patch of ground where I meant the beast to end up standing. I had packed the floor of that emptiness with stone dragged up into a bed of spikes, and then I had told the surface to look whole and solid again, and to wait. All night it had waited under the dragon's own feet. Now I told it to stop pretending. The clearing opened under the dragon like a trapdoor thrown wide. It dropped, and even then, even in the middle of falling, it remembered the thing I had been praying all night it would forget. It had never needed the ground at all. The wings came up. It meant to fly. I brought the house down on one of them. The full weight of the home, 4 legs and stone and split log and all, landed square on the near wing and pinned it flat against the lip of the pit. And Fiona was already gone from my side, past me and out and into the air on the far side of the beast, claws spread, and she went through the membrane of the other wing the way a knife goes through a wet sail. 2 long tiers, top to bottom, and the wing was not a wing anymore. It was rags. Nothing held the dragon up. The strongest thing in the forest fell into the one hole it had never seen, down onto the bed it had never known was under it, and the red glare that had drowned the moon out of the whole sky all night long went dark beneath the earth. It did not rise again. For a while, I only stood in the doorway and listened to my own house creak and settle around me. The walls were mending in the quiet, cracks drawing closed one after another. That same slow, patient knit as always, as though nothing at all had happened here tonight. Then Fiona climbed up onto the battered roof and reached down and hauled me up after her. Below us, the pit had gone still. The great red shape at the bottom of it lay dark and unmoving. "It's our win," I said, down into the hole, to the thing that had been so certain we were only prey. Red dragon. Fiona was crying and laughing at the same time, the way you do when the fear has run so high it has nowhere left to go. "We won." She caught a fistful of my sleeve and held on. "We really won, Alan. A house had killed a dragon. My house. The thing I had built with my hands in a forest that was supposed to be where I went to die quietly, so that no one back home would ever have to think about me again." I let myself stand in the feeling of it for exactly as long as it lasted, which was not long, because the first gray light was coming up over the trees, and by it, I could finally see what the winning had cost. The field was gone. The squid potatoes I had put in the ground that spring, the garden, the little fences, the first small house I had raised the day I first learned a dead oak would do exactly what I asked it. All of it was ash now, gray and still warm and shifting in the morning wind. A whole season of work, everything I had made in this place, gone, except the one thing I had built to survive being hit. The fortress still stood, scorched black down one whole side, the log split half through, but standing, and even now its walls were quietly closing the last of their wounds, stitching the cracks shut the way they had all night. It had come through the way I had made it to come through. That was the only mercy in the whole clearing, and it was enough. I climbed down and put my hand flat against the dead dragon, and I let demolition do the other thing it does, not break the body, read it. When you take a monster apart, you keep what it knew, and this one had known a great deal. They came to me one after another, the way your cold hands come back to life at a fire. The fire first, of course, the breath that had melted my outer wall to nothing. Then the scales, the hide that nothing I owned had been able to cut all night. Then the fangs, then the claws. Weapons I could have used 100 times over these long months in this forest, and never once had. And then one more thing arrived that stopped me cold, because it was not a weapon at all. I stood there with my palm still on the cooling scales, and turned the shape of it over in my head, not sure at first what I was even holding. Fiona saw my face change. "What is it?" She came to my shoulder, ears pricked forward, watching me. "That last one, you went still. What did you find?" "Wings," I said. She looked from me to the dead beast, to the torn rags of the wing she herself had cut open, and I watched her walk the thought through, half a step behind me and closing fast. Her hand found my arm. "The dragon's wings. You mean—" She stopped, started again, quieter, almost afraid to say it and be wrong. "You mean the skill. It's flight. It lets you fly. It lets a thing fly," I said. "Anything I put it on." And I turned and looked at the scorched, battered, self-mending fortress standing in the middle of all that ash. And Fiona followed my eyes to it, and I watched her understand what I was about to do a full breath before I did it. We packed before we left, because you do not walk away from food when your purse is as thin as ours was. The water, the last of the mandrakes, the squid potatoes I dug out of the warm ash, still good under the skin. Fiona rolled all of it into the house without a single word of complaint. "Packing up was never the trouble," she said, when I started to apologize for the state of everything. "You know that. Stop it." Then I gave the house the last skill. I still do not fully understand how the thing works, even now. It is the same way a mage will mount a bird's skill onto a plain wooden broom and then step off a tower without falling. Flight does not sit down and argue with the weight of a thing. It simply lifts it. So I fixed the dragon's wings into the fortress the way I had worked everything else into it over these months. Wood into stone, into slime, into all the rest of it. And when it was done, I put my hand on the wall and told the whole home to rise. It rose. The entire house came up off the ruined ground, 4 legs folding away underneath it. No legs needed now, none ever again. And the ash fell away beneath us. The black scar of the burned forest fell away. The pit with the dark shape lying in it fell away, going small and then smaller, and then gone under the drifting smoke. Fiona had both hands pressed flat to the window and was making a sound I had never once heard her make in all our time together. Half a laugh and half something with no name. And I will be honest and tell you that I made it too. A place no one on the earth could reach. A home that could not be surrounded, could not be starved out, could not be walked up to by anyone who had decided, from a throne or a doorway, exactly where I was and was not allowed to stand. I had told myself all winter that I only wanted a wall a dragon could not touch. What I had now was a wall the ground itself could not hold down, and that was the moment I finally said out loud the thing I had carried since the day the door of a cold marble hall swung shut behind me, and a whole room decided I was a disappointment they would not have to look at again. One day, I told her, watching the horizon come up wide and clean and open in front of us, I am going back, for my mother, and for Emily, my sister, still down there somewhere under my father's roof, in a country that had taken one look at me and decided I was a thing to be thrown away. I'm going to bring the 2 of them out of progress, all 3 of us, out and free, and for good. I did not have a plan. I want to be honest about that part. It was not a map, it was a promise. The kind you make out loud so that everything you do afterward has a direction to point in. Because safety had never been the wound. I could hide in these clouds until I was an old man, and it would not close the thing that was actually torn. Being thrown away was the wound, and you do not heal that by staying gone. Fiona did not say anything clever back to me. She only watched me say it, all of it. And then she asked me, very quietly, whether it was really all right to go out into the world at all, with the man who had been hunting her still somewhere out there in it. That part's on me, I said. As long as you are with me, you don't have to spend a single night thinking about him. Leave that one to me. Yes, she said. Just that, one word. And she smiled the way a person smiles when they have finally decided to believe something, because by then, she did. The forest that had made me fell away behind us. Black Fang had taken in a prince who happened to glow the wrong color on the wrong day, and it was handing back a builder who had killed a dragon with a house, and now it could not hold on to either one of us. We turned the whole home toward the far edge of the world, and the wide country waiting past it, toward people and coin and whatever else was out there, and we flew. For 8 days the home flew, and the forest would not end. Green rolled out under us to every horizon, unbroken, and the wings carried the whole weight of it without complaint. I stood in the doorway with the wind pulling at my sleeves, and watched the world go by, the way a man watches something he used to be afraid of. Fiona came to my shoulder, ears up in the cold air. She asked me what I meant to do once we were clear of all this green. Find land nobody's fighting over, I said. Build something that stands. A real house, not a fort. I kept my eyes on the far edge, where the trees thinned to nothing. Then I go back over the mountains for my mother, and for Emily. Where I come from there was never room to breathe. I'm going to give them a room. She was quiet a moment. Then she said she would follow wherever I pointed the house, that the only thing that frightened her was staying too long in a place thick with people. Beyond that, she was mine to command. I didn't tell her what a prince who glowed the wrong color knew about crowds. Some things you carry without handing them over. Truth was, I could already picture the house I meant to build. Not the fortress, a house. A low, warm one with a fire that didn't have to double as a weapon, and a door my mother could stand in without checking who was behind her. Emily would complain the walls were plain, and then never leave. I had killed a dragon and stolen the sky out from under it, and the only thing I wanted to do with all of it was give 2 people a quiet room. My father had built a whole kingdom and never managed that much. On the 8th day, the forest finally broke. The green fell away and reddish-brown earth opened ahead, wide and bare and new, and I felt the tiredness of running my skills without rest for so long settle into my hands like sand. Then the home lurched. It dropped a body's length in a heartbeat, hard enough to throw the plates off the shelf. I threw out scent detection and swept the whole sky under us. No monster, no storm, no beast climbing the air toward me. Nothing. Nothing at all, and we were still falling. Hold on to me, I said, and I put both hands flat to the floor. Construction poured out through the walls and 4 legs punched down out of the belly of the house to take the ground. Water body flooded the frame soft. Fiona was already moving. Her whole body let go of its shape and became slime, cool and clear, and it wrapped around me like a closing hand. The earth came up and hit us like a fist. The slime let go and became a girl again, and we both dropped where we stood, flat on the carpet in the wreck of everything that had been standing a minute before. For a while, neither of us moved. Alive was enough. When I could, I took stock. All 4 legs snapped clean off. Cracks running the walls, the roof split, half the shelves down. But the frame had held, and a broken thing is only a puzzle to me. I laid my hands on it, pulled the ruined parts apart with demolition, and grew them back whole with construction. By full dark, the walls were sound again. Fiona was crouched over something on the floor. Her ears drooped, and her tail with them. Her favorite plate, the blue one, had come off the shelf in the fall and cracked across the middle. She held the 2 halves together like that would knit them. I can build a house that walks, I told her, taking the pieces. I think I can manage a plate. I fixed it while she watched, and the ears came back up. Come morning, I regrew the legs, thicker this time, and the whole house stood and took a step on its own. A cottage on 4 bracing legs, striding across empty country. I looked at it a while. The mobile fortress, I said, mostly to myself. We turned it east, toward a thin tower on the skyline, and a smell of wood smoke and living things on the wind. I still had no idea what had reached up out of a clear sky and pulled us down. That question sat in my chest the whole way, cold and patient, and I couldn't answer it. 3 days we walked the country like that. It was gentler land than Blackfang, tilled fields, fence lines, cart ruts worn deep. Someone had tamed all of this a long time ago. Fiona did not travel well. The house rocked side to side with every stride, and by the 2nd hour, she had gone green under the fur of her ears and was begging for the ground. We stopped often. She'd sit on a stone with her head down, breathing slow, and swear the swaying was worse than any monster. On the 3rd day, a village came up out of the fields, a real one, ringed by a tall wooden wall built to keep monsters out, orderly. Nothing like the spiked teeth I used to nail up around my own home. People here had guards and walls and rules, and I was about to learn I understood none of them. We didn't march a walking fortress up to their gate. I found a grove off the road and ringed the house in with fresh-grown trees until you couldn't tell it from the wood. and we left it hidden there. Then we pulled on rough fur clothes to pass for worn-out adventurers. Fiona took a slow breath and let Doppelganger close over her. The ears folded down into ordinary hair. The tail was simply gone. A plain human girl stood where she'd been, and something in her face tightened as she did it. We walked up to the gate on foot, like anyone. The gatekeeper wanted a guild card before he wanted our names. I gave him the friendly version, that we were adventurers, worn thin after a long job, hoping to rest a night inside the wall. He held out a flat hand and waited. When I admitted I'd left mine at home and tried to talk him into one day, just one, he didn't even blink. He told me plainly that anyone could call himself an adventurer, that a card was the only word he took, and that unknown faces did not come through his gate. Then he told us to move along. So that was a guild card. In this world, you were no one without a small piece of proof I had never heard of, and I'd left the whole country that might have given me one. I stood there feeling like a fool. Fiona touched my arm and nodded down the slope, toward the river below the wall. Someone was working a watermill down there. We could ask, she said. The one working the mill was a girl about my age, red hair to her shoulders, a bucket in one hand, a plain sword riding her hip like she knew how to use it. She looked us over, heard my story about being tired adventurers, and didn't buy a word of it. She asked flat out why she'd lift a finger for two strangers when there was nothing in it for her. Fair question. Because we fix things, I said. Buildings, furniture, give us a job, and we'll earn our way past your gate. That got a short laugh out of her. Adventurers, she scoffed, always claiming to be handy. She jerked her chin at the great water wheel hanging still over the river. A storm had cracked it clean through weeks back, she said, and the village had no builder of its own to mend it. Fix that, and she'd walk us through the gate herself. I put my hand on the ruined wheel. Demolition ran through the split timber and took the broken parts apart in a breath. Construction poured back in behind it, and the wheel rebuilt itself under my palm. New spokes, new rim, whole and true. And the current caught it, and it began to turn, slow and steady, throwing river light up the bank. The girl's mouth came open. The bucket hung forgotten at her side. No way, she got out. No way. That should take a builder a week. Behind me, Fiona patted my shoulder, quiet and knowing, like none of this surprised her at all. She was as good as her word. Her name was Karen Lane, and her family kept the inn in her own village, a place called the Owl's Perch. She walked us up to the gate of that village, Nab, and talked the guard round. He didn't believe a wandering pair had mended a storm-broke wheel until Karen swore to it, and then he softened all at once, waved us through, and even said sorry for the hard time we must have had on the road. Inside, the common room was warm and low, and full of ordinary talk. Karen set us at a table, glad to have helped, curious where two people with a trick like mine had really come from. I let the misread stand. She thought the wheel was some kind of alchemy, and alchemy was easier to explain than the truth. I kept it light, asked her, like it was nothing, whether she'd ever heard of a place called the Progress Kingdom. Progress? She thought about it, then pointed with her chin toward the north, where the light was already gone. Sure, that's way over past the Ashen Mountains. Long way from here. She took a pull of her drink. This is Draconis Empire land, you know, all of it. Out to the mountains. The room kept talking. Somewhere behind me, two men were going on about a levy, about soldiers moving east, about how the emperor, Draymond, the fourth of that name, had stopped pretending the peace with Progress would hold. The border was waking up, one of them said. Been a long time coming. I heard all of it from very far away. Draconis Empire, the sworn enemy of everything I came from. The two countries had stood at each other's throats longer than anyone at that table had been alive, and I had fallen out of a clear sky straight into the middle of it. Not a strange country, enemy country. The one place on the whole map where being a son of Progress was not a story you told. It was a rope they put around your neck, and a war was waking up between the two. That was the part that went into me like cold water and stayed. I sat very still and let the room's warmth go on around me, while the floor tilted somewhere underneath it. My mother was on the far side of those mountains. Emily was on the far side of those mountains. Days ago, I had stood in open sky with the wind in my sleeves and made it sound so simple. Build a house, cross the mountains, carry the two of them out. I had said it like a man reading a map. Now the map had a name written across the whole middle of it, and the name was the enemy, and armies were about to start moving over the exact ground I'd promised to walk. The road home ran straight through a country that would kill me for my name, in a season when that country was sharpening its knives. I had crossed a whole forest to get out of reach of the people who threw me away. I had landed inside the one border where my birth was a death sentence, with a war closing on the two people I'd promised to save. Where are you two from anyway? Karen asked. I made myself smile. Little mountain village, I said. So far up, nobody's put it on a map. We don't answer to anybody. It was thin. I knew it was thin even as I said it. But Karen took it, and Fiona took my cue without a flicker, and the lie held for one more night. We thanked Karen, said we'd find a room, and stood. Every step across that warm, friendly room, I was doing the same math over and over. However carefully I'd hidden who I was from Fiona, I had to hide it 10 times deeper from everyone else under this roof. And one slip would not just fall on me, it would fall on the girl who just walked 2 strangers through her own front gate. I had a name that could get us killed here, and a home I couldn't fly for fear of what had pulled it down. And somewhere past the Ashen Mountains, on the wrong side of a war just beginning to stir, 2 people were waiting who didn't yet know I was coming for them. The inn had a wooden owl over the door, and a common room that smelled of bacon. And for the first time in longer than I cared to count, I walked into a building I had not raised with my own hands. "This is it," Karen said, spreading her arms like she was showing off a castle. "The Owl's Perch, my family's place." So the girl who had vouched for us at the gate lived here. That was luck I hadn't earned. A big man came out from the back with a head like a bear skull and a grin to match, took one look at his daughter carrying a tray she hadn't been asked to carry, and told the room that snow would be falling by morning if Karen was working of her own will. She threw a rag at him. He caught it without looking. He knocked the price of a room down to 2 silver coins the moment he heard about the water wheel. I didn't argue. Coin was thin, and I had learned not to refuse a kindness that cost me nothing to accept. We took room 101, up the narrow stair, a double bed, and a window with a real latch. The second the door shut, Fiona let out a long breath and let the disguise go. Her ears came back up out of her hair, the tail unfolded, and she sat down on the edge of the bed like a puppet with the strings cut. "I forget how heavy it is," she murmured, wearing another face all day. I sat across from her and said the thing we'd both been circling since the gate. My mother and my sister were on the far side of the Ashen Mountains, deep in the Emperor's own country, and every step toward them ran through land that would kill me for who I was born. We couldn't rush it. We'd stay here, in this little town, keep our heads down, gather what we could, and cross the mountains when we understood what we were crossing into. Then the food came up, and for a while, none of that mattered. It was a plain bacon stew, potato, carrot, onion, and enough salt to remind a body it was still alive. After a year of monster meat charred over a fire, it tasted like something a king should have been ashamed to keep from his people. Fiona pressed her hands together and closed her eyes over the bowl like she was praying to it. I caught myself doing the same. Karen watched us from the doorway with her arms folded. "Okay, that's enough," she said. "Quit clasping your hands. You're creeping me out. Stop worshipping the stew." We did not stop worshipping the stew, but under the warmth, the common room downstairs kept talking, and the talk all ran one way. Travelers coming off the road spoke of drums in the border towns, of levies, of soldiers moving east in long gray columns, while the harvest still stood in the fields. The Draconis Empire and the Progress Kingdom were sliding toward open war, and every voice that mentioned it agreed on one thing. Progress was the one that would bleed for it. I ate my heaven-sent stew and went cold from the inside out. The kingdom that had thrown me to the forest to die was the same kingdom my mother and Emily were trapped inside. The war rolling toward it was rolling toward them, and the one road I had to reach them, over those mountains, was about to fill up with armies and close like a fist. I set my spoon down quietly so no one would see my hand wasn't steady. By morning, I had a plan, and it lasted exactly as long as it took one old man to find me. Fiona and I went out early to walk the market, ears open, faces plain, just 2 travelers listening for anything about the border or the Imperial Knights. Spice carts had come up from the capital, allspice and nutmeg laid out in little cones, and I was doing a fine job of looking like a man who cared about nutmeg when a stooped old fellow named Eli shuffled up with a cracked ceramic pot cradled in both arms. "This pot means a great deal to me," he said, holding it out like an offering. "If it's a matter of coin, I'll pay whatever's fair." I asked how he knew I could mend anything at all. He glanced past me. Karen had appeared at my elbow, suddenly very interested in the middle distance. "I might have mentioned the water wheel," she admitted, "to a couple of people, who might have mentioned it to a couple more. I fixed a price, 3 silver, and in exchange, I got to ask my own questions. And I put my hand on the broken pot. The crack drew itself shut. The pot was whole in the space of a breath, not a seam left to show it had ever been broken. Eli made a sound like he'd been struck. So did the 3 people behind him. And that, it turned out, was the mistake. Word went through that market like fire through dry grass. Somebody had seen the pot come together like magic, and within minutes, I had a wall of villagers in front of me, all of them shoving broken things into my arms. A cracked hoe, a split stool, a snapped hinge, a chipped little clay bird some child had cried over. I tried to beg off. The crowd did not care what I tried. Fine, I said, giving up. All of you, bring me your broken things and form a line. Karen planted herself at the front and kept order, and every time someone pushed too hard for my name or my trade, she cut across them. No prying, a craftsman keeps his own secrets, back of the line. Fiona worked the other end, taking the coins, taking a chicken and a slab of smoked boar from the ones short on silver, dropping a hand on my sleeve once to murmur that Eli truly was struggling, and I should let his 3 silver go to 2. I let it go to 2. By noon, there was not a broken object left standing in Nab, and my quiet morning of listening for war news had turned into a public performance in front of the whole town. Every face in that village now knew mine. I told myself it was fine. I told myself no one here could possibly care who I was. I was wrong on the second count, and I would find out how wrong before the day was done. Karen brought lunch out to us at a friendly merchant's stall, thick sandwiches of lettuce, onion, and salami. As a reward, she said, for a morning that had made half the village happy. Fiona nudged a cloth bag across the table to me and let it fall open. Silver, a lot of it. Look, she whispered, eyes bright. It's full, 180 coins. I turned that over. A farmhand out here earned about 5 silver for a full day breaking his back in a field. We'd made the wage of a month before lunch. However badly the morning had derailed my plans, we would not be going hungry on this side of the mountains. The merchant was a chatty old sort, plugged into every rumor that passed through his stall. So I paid for my sandwich with a question. Was it true what they said in the common room, that progress and the empire were headed for war? He shrugged and answered around a mouthful. He'd heard the drums same as everyone, sure, but locally? The emperor's grip was iron. The streets were quiet. Taxes came on time. Border news blew in and blew out again. He wouldn't lose sleep over it. Then he brightened, the way a man does when he remembers a better bit of gossip, and mentioned, just in passing, just as something to fill the air between bites, that they'd even had royalty come through not long ago. The 7th Prince of Progress himself, wanting to talk trade. He said the name like it meant nothing. Barrett. The market kept moving around me. The merchant kept chewing, but everything in me had gone very still and very cold, the way a pond goes under the first hard frost. Barrett, my brother, 1 month younger than me and a lifetime crueler. I saw the ceremony hall again with no effort at all. The marble, the cold high windows, my father's voice reading the verdict that made me trash, and Barrett standing off to the side with that wide splitting grin, laughing. Not a quiet laugh, a performance of a laugh, thrown up at the ceiling, delighted, so that everyone would be sure to see how little the 9th prince was worth. They marched me out to the forest to die, and the last sound I carried in was his. And now this ordinary old man was telling me, over a salami sandwich, that Barrett was here, inside the empire, walking the same roads, breathing the same air as the brother he'd watched thrown away. I made my face do nothing. I picked up my sandwich again as if my hands belonged to me. I even nodded along, filed it away, asked the merchant a dull follow-up question in a voice that didn't shake, because the one thing I could not afford in the whole world was to look like a man to whom that name meant anything at all. Fiona was watching me across the table. She didn't know why, but she'd felt the temperature drop. Her hand found my knee under the table and stayed there. Karen was mid-story about something else entirely and hadn't noticed a thing. A cruel, half-witted prince did not cross an enemy border to haggle over trade goods. I knew my brother. Whatever Barrett was really here for, with a war coming that his kingdom looked set to lose, it was leverage of some kind, something progress needed badly. The family that had thrown me away was groping in the dark for power and drifting, without the faintest idea, toward the very brother they'd left for dead. I was still steadying my breath when a knot of color moved across the far side of the square and pulled my eye without asking. Well-dressed men, 6 or 7 of them, cutting through the market with the unhurried arrogance of people who did not expect to be jostled. They wore progress colors, my father's colors. Barrett's men, on some errand in the flesh. Not 50 paces from where I sat chewing bread I could no longer taste. I looked down at once. Too late. One of them had slowed. He was older than the rest, gray at the temples. The kind of man who spends 30 years standing quietly at the edge of a court and remembers every face that ever crossed it. And he had stopped in the middle of the moving crowd to look at me, not glance. Look, his eyes had narrowed and his head had tilted a fraction to one side. The exact motion of a man trying to fit a face he was seeing to a face he was certain belonged to a dead boy. Because that was what I was, to anyone from home. The 9th prince died in Blackfang Forest a year ago. Everyone knew it. And here was a road-worn stranger in an enemy market wearing that dead prince's face. And this old retainer could not make the two of them stop being the same person. For one long breath he stared, and I felt the thread pull taut between us across the whole square, a thin, cold wire drawn tight through the noise and the sunlight. I turned my face away slow, too fast would have been worse than the staring, and let the hood of my traveler's coat come up as if against the midday glare, heart slamming. Just a man squinting at the sun, just a nobody eating lunch. He didn't call out, he didn't cross the square, he didn't lift a hand or say a word to the men beside him. But when I risked one flick of my eyes back, he was still looking, half turned now, dragged along by his own party, while his gaze stayed snagged on me, unwilling to let a ghost go. Then the crowd folded between us, and he was gone, carried off with the rest of them toward wherever Barrett's business waited. Nothing had happened. No shout, no drawn blade, no finger pointed, no name spoken aloud, and everything had happened. Someone from home had half seen the dead prince alive and walking in the middle of enemy country under a borrowed name. The fuse was lit now. It just hadn't caught yet. I made myself think it through, cold and clean, the way you check a wall you're not sure will hold. If that old man remembered where he'd seen my face, if he said one word to the right person, I wasn't a road-worn craftsman anymore. I was a son of progress, breathing on land where that was a death sentence, and the rope wouldn't stop at my neck. Karen had vouched for me at her own gate. Fiona was passing for human 3 inches from a court retainer's eyes. Every kindness this town had shown me became a thing I dragged them into. That was the real weight of the name I carried, and it had just walked past me in broad daylight and turned its head. "Alan?" Fiona said quietly, leaning in. "You've gone pale. What is it?" I opened my mouth to give her something. Anything that wasn't the truth I still couldn't hand her, and I never got the chance to lie. A bell started hammering somewhere near the wall. Hard, fast. No rhythm to it, but panic. Every head in the market came up at once. Karen was on her feet before the second peal, her hand already dropping to the plain sword on her hip. The easy innkeeper's daughter gone in a blink. "That's the alarm," she said. "Monster on the wall. You two stay put. It's dangerous." She was already moving as she said it, backing toward the gate, pointing a hard finger at us. "I mean it. Stay." Then she turned and ran toward the trouble, which told me more about Karen than a week of talking would have. Protecting this village wasn't a chore she'd been handed. It was simply who she was. I looked at Fiona. Fiona looked at me, and I could see the question in her before she asked it. Her whole body had gone forward, ready. "Should we help them?" she said. I thought about the retainer's stare still crawling on the back of my neck, about a market full of eyes, and my brother's men somewhere in this same town, about how a single flash of a super-tier skill in the open would light me up brighter than any bell. And I thought about Karen running the wrong way alone. "For now, we watch," I said. "If it turns bad, we step in." We moved with the crowd toward the gate, where a ring of villagers had gathered to gawk from a safe distance, and I got my first look at the thing that had them screaming. Past the open gate, out where the fields began, a big eater worm had reared up out of the ground. It was enormous, a thick, coiling column of gray muscle taller than a man standing on another man's shoulders. Its blunt head, a wet ring of mismatched fangs that opened and closed on nothing, tasting the air for the next thing to swallow. Facing it stood Karen and a handful of village men in patched leather armor, and one look told me everything. The men were green. They clustered and shuffled and shoved at each other's shoulders, and I heard one volunteer very loudly to hold the line from the back while the others charged, and another refused to be pushed and tell him to charge himself. Not one of them wanted to be the first forward. Karen stepped out ahead of all of them, sword up, and started barking them into shape. The only steady thing on that whole line. The worm lowered its ringed mouth toward the gate, and my hand, without my telling it to, had already come halfway up. Karen didn't wait for the thing to make up its mind. She went in while the rest of the line was still shoving each other over who stood where, her blade already lit, a thin crawl of lightning running the edge, the move she called Thunderblade, and she opened the worm's gray belly in one long stroke. The village men found their courage after that. They swarmed the wound, hacking the same split seam over and over, and the thick hide finally gave, and for about 10 heartbeats, it looked easy. Beside me, Fiona let out a breath and almost smiled. "Looks like there's no part in this for us," she murmured. The worm proved her wrong in the ugliest way I have ever seen. Its whole column heaved, the ringed mouth clenched shut, and then it threw up everything it had ever swallowed. Not blood, bones, a whole shotgun blast of them, fired out in a gray cloud that took the entire line off their feet at once. Karen went down with the rest. Her sword spun out of her hand and disappeared into the dust, and the worm, patient the way only a starving thing is patient, folded its blind head down toward the one person on the ground who no longer had a blade. Here was the exact thing I had spent every day in NAB telling myself I would not do. A man born to a building class who could kill like that draws eyes. and there were the wrong eyes in this town. Only a day before, an old man in my brother's colors had stopped in the market and stared at my face like he was reading a name off a gravestone, a name that gets you killed if he ever finished remembering it. One more display in the open, and he might finish it, and it wouldn't fall on me alone. Karen had vouched me through her own gate. Fiona was standing 3 steps away, wearing a face that wasn't hers. One hard look from the wrong man away from being hunted all over again. Every scrap of power I showed was a debt somebody I cared about might have to pay. The smart move, the safe move, was to keep my hands down and let the village handle its own dying. Then I looked at Karen in the dirt with her mouth open and no blade between her and that mouth, and I stopped caring what was smart. Fiona, it was all I got out. She was already moving. Her speed star flared and the world smeared sideways. One blink, and she had me under the arms. Another, and she'd set us both down square between Karen and the worm. Her hands already gone to the long gray claws she keeps folded away under a borrowed human face. I put my palm out and told the ground to build. Timber tore up out of the earth in a raw, wet mass and rammed straight down the worm's open throat. Construction, the same skill I used to hang a door, turned sideways and shoved a wall into a monster's mouth. The lunge choked on it. The head whipped back, gagging on a meal that had become a barricade. That bought me the only thing I needed, which was one clean breath. I raised the puppet next, a fighting double of my own, gray and clawed and patient, pulled itself up out of nothing at my shoulder and swarmed the thrashing body, claws hooking into the hide to climb. That was its job. Keep the head busy, keep the coils fighting the wrong enemy, while I knelt and laid both hands flat and built the second half. Stone came up out of the churned field in a triangle, a spike tall as a standing man, and I ran dissolving poison fluid down every face of it until the rock sweated something that ate the air just above it, a shimmer coming off the point like heat off a road. I lined it up under the worm's fighting body. Then I let it fly. The puppet's claws sheared the head clean off the column in the same instant the poisoned spike drove up under the body and buried itself deep. No spray, no theater. The head simply parted from the trunk came down like a felled tower, and the whole ringed length of it went into the long shudder that dying things do. I didn't trust it. Worms are famous for climbing back up after the world has already decided they're finished. A thing that looks dead isn't always dead, a lesson I happen to know from the other end. So I drove a row of wooden stakes down through it, one after another, until it stopped moving for good. Then it was just me, standing in a settling cloud of dust over a kill in front of the whole village. I braced for the recoil. In the kingdom that raised me, a man born to a making class who fought like a killer was something to fear, or something to report. Off his map, out of his caste, wrong in a way the law had words for. So I stood there in the dust and waited for Nab to back away from me. Karen ruined the whole grim moment by grabbing a fistful of my sleeve. That, she got out, hauling herself upright with her eyes huge, was the most incredible thing I have ever watched a person do. She was grinning like it was her name day, not one flicker of the fear I'd braced for. Fiona slid in at my other side, quietly pleased, and made a show of brushing dust off my shoulder, so nobody would notice how ready she'd been to tear the thing apart herself. "You have to come out with me," Karen pressed on, already tugging, "on a real job. Somebody who can do that is wasting his life fixing pots." I told her I'd think about it, which she took as a yes. The rest of Nab came up out of the gate in a loud, grateful knot before I could take it back. The militiamen clapping my back and calling me Big Brother. Somebody hollering that it was the first time in his life he'd seen anyone able to keep Karen safe. Nobody asked what class I was. Nobody cared. The village I'd walked in to quietly spy on had just decided it loved me. What none of us could see was the road. A story like that never stays in one village. By dark, the tale of the stranger who'd killed a big eater worm out near the Ashen Mountains was already walking the trade routes, mouth to mouth, getting taller with every teller. And somewhere along the Empire's edge, it walked straight into a camp of men wearing my brother's colors. A stranger of impossible skill in a nowhere village. They marked it. They filed it away as maybe useful. None of them knew whose trail they'd just cut. I didn't know they were listening. The net had its first thread in it now, and neither end could feel the other pull. That night, the common room did what common rooms do, which is talk. And the talk was all war. It had turned. Everyone had a piece of it. A cousin levied east, a grain wagon seized on the road, a column of gray soldiers seen moving where no soldiers should be. And when I fit the pieces together, the shape they made was one I knew in my bones. The Progress Kingdom was losing, not slipping, losing. The proud men who ran that kingdom had had built their whole army out of sword draws and battle classes, and they had never once counted the cost of feeding it, moving it, mending what broke. A long war is nothing but feeding and moving and mending. The exact blind spot that made them look at a builder and see garbage was the blind spot bleeding them white now. And sitting there in the lamplight, I finally understood what Barrett was really doing inside an enemy empire, wearing the word trade like a borrowed coat. He wasn't here to deal, he was here to scavenge. A kingdom that is losing sends its princes out to hunt for a weapon, a relic, a hired blade, any edge that might drag a war back from the wrong side of the line. The same men who had branded me useless and marched me into a forest to die were now crawling through the empire I'd landed in, hands out, begging the world for exactly the kind of power they had thrown away in me. I turned the thought over slowly and found that it didn't burn the way I'd expected. There was no heat in it at all. I had spent a long time imagining what I'd feel when the men who threw me out finally started to pay, and I'd always pictured something loud. This was quieter than that, and colder, and somehow worse for them. They had looked at what I could do and called it worthless, and now the whole kingdom was going to run itself into the ground, reaching for a thing it had already held once and let go. The fall had started. I could feel it beginning, one loose stone at a time, and all I had to do was keep breathing and let it come. "You've gone quiet again." Karen dropped onto the bench across from me and pushed a mug over. "You do that, right in the middle of a room full of noise? You just leave, just listening," I told her. Under the table, Fiona's hand found my knee and rested there. She'd heard the war talk too, and she knew, better than Karen ever could, that a turning war and a tightening net were the same weather coming from two directions. Karen had the job pinned down before I'd finished my first cup. "You're spacing out again." She dropped her guild card on the table between us, like a winning hand. "You're an adventurer. You've done plenty of these, right?" I let her keep believing it and asked what the job was. "A good one, a really good one, and I'm getting your help whether you like it or not." She leaned in. "The charnel ruins, west through the forest. Monsters have started crawling up out of them, and somebody wants to know why. Rewards 6 platinum. She grinned. "We split it even, 3 each. 6 platinum was a lot of coin, which only told me how dangerous the ruins really were. But there was leverage in a place like that. Resources, salvage, maybe an edge of my own worth having, with a war rolling toward the road home. And there was Karen, who plainly wasn't going to take no. All right, I said, but just this once." I asked Fiona to come with us. She set down the pan she was scrubbing and shook her head, and something crossed her face before she smoothed it over. "I'm sorry. The owner asked me to stay," she said. "The Imperial Knights are coming to inspect the village in a few days, and he wants the Owl's Perch ready for them. He asked me to plan the whole welcome. I can't leave him short. Imperial Knights, Empire eyes, the kind that look hard at everyone in a room and remember faces." Of course she wanted to be nowhere near them, and of course she couldn't say that out loud in a common room, so she just held it behind her teeth. "Please, leave the inn to me." But she stopped herself. "But what?" I asked. For a moment she looked like she might finally name the thing sitting behind her eyes. Then she folded it back up. "No, it's nothing. I'll pray the quest goes well." And she picked the pan back up, and the worry stayed on her face long after her voice had let it go. We kitted out as adventurers and checked our gear twice at the gate. Packs, rope, the plain tools of people who walk into holes in the ground for money. Half of NAB turned out to see us off, which a week ago would have made me nervous, and now just made me tired in a good way. They kept crowding up to thank me all over again for the worm. Deccan, the old gatekeeper, waved us through with the same warmth he'd have given his own grandchildren, telling us to mind the ruins and come back with all our arms and legs still attached. Karen laughed and promised him souvenirs. Fiona walked us to the edge of the crowd. She didn't say the thing she'd swallowed at the inn. She just squeezed my wrist, quick and hard, and told me to be careful. And I told her to take care of herself, which between the two of us has always meant more than it sounds like. Then Karen was already 6 paces down the western track, calling over her shoulder for me to keep up, and I went. The road west was easy for a while, and Karen filled it with talk, jobs she'd taken, monsters she'd fought, a running argument with herself about the best way to spend 3 platinum. Somewhere in the middle of it, walking beside a girl who decided on her own that I was worth keeping, I felt an old thing turn over in my chest. I had been a prince once, 9th of my line, born into a palace full of people, and in all those years, I had never once had someone who was simply mine. A comrade on a road, an easy voice at my shoulder that wanted nothing from me but company. I'd had to lose the whole kingdom to find it. I let the thought pass, the way I'd taught myself to let all of them pass, and kept walking. Behind us, out past the mountains, the men who had thrown me away were still falling. I couldn't see it happen, but I could feel the direction of it now. A proud, cruel kingdom coming apart at the seams, its princes scattered across enemy ground with their hands open, hunting for a power they'd once held in the palace and called worthless. Sooner or later, a hunt like that finds what it's looking for. Sooner or later, it would reach for me. It just hadn't closed its fingers yet. Then the trees gave out and the ground did, and we were standing at the mouth of the charnel ruins, a black seam in the earth where broken stone went down into dark, cold air, breathing up out of it like the place was still alive. Karen checked her sword and grinned at me, all nerve and no fear. Ready, worm killer. I looked down into the dark and thought about all the roads that were quietly bending toward this one hole in the ground. Karen's, mine, and a desperate brother's, somewhere out in the same wilderness, hunting for exactly the kind of power that was about to walk in ahead of him. Ready, I said, and we went in. The gate had letters carved across it that nobody alive could read, and Karen ran her thumb along one of them like she expected it to answer her. It didn't. Behind it, the dark just sat there, breathing cold air into a warm afternoon. I made her stop before we lit anything. I don't want us landing in trouble halfway down because of something I kept back, I told her. So we trade. Jobs, skills, everything that matters when it goes wrong. She thought that was fair. She went first actually, which surprised me. Most people guard their hand. She was a swordswoman, lightning in the blade, a technique she called Thunderblade, and a bigger one for when the first wasn't enough. Fast, loud, and it left her wide open on the follow-through. She told me that part too, the weakness, without me asking. Then it was my turn, and I gave her exactly as much as I trusted the dark to hold. Architect, I said, a making class. A few simple monster skills on top of it, nothing fancy. She squinted at me. So, disappointed I'm weak, or scared I'll find out you are? A grin pulled at the corner of it. I'm me, you're you. That's all there is to it. I did not tell her the rest. I never do. That guarded little silence had kept me breathing for over a year, and old habits don't unlearn themselves for one honest afternoon. What I felt, standing there, was the strange relief of a person who has learned to expect the follow-up question, and doesn't get it. We lit the lanterns. One of mine carried a scent catch that flared when something living, or something that used to be, moved nearby. Then we walked in, and the sunlight closed behind us like a door. An hour in, the tunnel opened into a room that had been worked before. Rusted shovels leaned in a corner, pickaxes gone to flakes. The gray ash of a fire so old it had no smell left. Somebody had made a base of this place once and then stopped, and the dark had kept their tools ever since. My lantern flared. I didn't even get the word out. The dark clicked, that dry, wrong rattle of bone finding bone, and the first skeleton came up out of the black with a rusted blade already swinging. Karen didn't wait to be scared of it. She stepped in and took its head off in one bright crack of lightning, and the thing folded into a pile of parts. Then the rest came. Not one, not three. A wall of them, clacking and grinding. Weapons scavenged off every fool who'd ever died down here. I put a wooden stake up through the floor and skewered two on the same shaft before they'd finished standing. It bought a breath. It didn't buy the room. For everyone I pinned and everyone Karen cut, two more scraped up out of the dark, and I felt the fight tipping the wrong way. That slow, sick slide where effort stops being enough. Back to back, Karen shouted. Don't you dare give me your spine to guard and then die on it. I gave her my spine. She was good, better than good, lightning painting the walls with every swing. But we were two people in an ocean of the dead, and oceans don't get tired. So I stopped trying to win it one skeleton at a time. I planted both hands and told the stone under us to do something it had never done for me before. Construction had always been walls and stakes, and shapes I set on purpose. This time I set a ring instead, a circle of stone cones rising out of the floor all the way around us, waist high, tips like a mouthful of gray fangs. Karen felt them come up against her boots and swore. Then I fired them. Every cone tore off its root at once and went out flat and hard in every direction. A full turn of the room emptied in a single breath. Stone spikes, I'd call it later, when I had the breath to name things. In the moment, it was just a wave of grinding white that went out and did not come back, and the clatter of the horde simply stopped. Bones everywhere, nothing left standing to make the sound. Karen mopped the stragglers, which were few, and then stood in the sudden quiet with her chest heaving. Amazing, she got out. One shot. That technique had me sure you were a mage. It's not as clean as it looked. I was already crouching, gathering the spent cones back, because that was the ugly little truth of it. I can only make so much at once, and I have to reclaim the material after, or I'm just a man who threw all his rocks at a wall. She laughed, too loud in the dead room, and told me she'd take that over magic any day. On my own, that would have gone badly. I told her so. Thanks, Karen. She waved it off like it cost her nothing to be stood beside. She took point after that, insisted on it. I'd earned a rest, she said, and she'd watch the floor for traps while I walked and got my legs back. She was still talking about the lunch she'd packed, cold meat, and hard bread wrapped in cloth, promising we'd eat it once we found somewhere that wasn't full of the recently deceased. She was mid-sentence about the bread when the floor spoke. A stone dropped under her boot with a flat, final click, the sound of a switch that had been waiting a very long time to be stepped on. I saw her face change. I saw her mouth start to shape the word sorry. Then the corridor opened like a trapdoor, because it was one, and the ground simply wasn't there anymore. Falling, I had about the length of a held breath to be clever. The mind does strange arithmetic in a drop like that. I ran the options the way I'd run a blueprint. A foothold jammed out of the wall too fast. I'd shatter my legs on it. Crimson wings, the dragon's own flight grafted onto me, but that needed a structure under it first, and there was nothing under me but dark, no time. Falling is the one problem building doesn't solve on its own, so I built the ground a different way. I threw out construction and grew a tree, a great one, straight up out of the coming floor, branches wide as a roof, and I laid water body over the branches so they gave instead of broke. We hit it. It caught us, bent, and then the whole thing snapped under the weight of 2 falling people and dumped us the last stretch into water. The pool took the rest, cold enough to stop the heart, deep enough to forgive the drop. I came up spitting, found a fistful of Karen's collar, and hauled us both toward the nearest edge of stone. We dragged out and lay there, soaked through, battered, breathing like the drowning we had just barely not done. Sorry, Karen managed, flat on her back, staring at a ceiling she couldn't see. I stepped on a switch. I was going to tell her it was all right, that we were alive, that a bad landing beats a good funeral, that I'd built worse out of less. I never said it, because I'd caught the light. There was light down here, far across the water, low and moving, lantern glow, where no lantern of ours had gone. Someone else was in the drowned dark at the bottom of the charnel ruins, and they were not adventurers. I got to my feet slowly, water running off me, and I looked at them across the pool the way you look at a thing your eyes refuse to translate. A cluster of men, huddled and filthy, backed into the last dry corner of a cave that had no other way out. Their gear was good under the ruin of it, too good for this deep, too fine for treasure hunters, and I knew the colors. I had grown up under those colors. They were the colors of the Progress Kingdom, and the war I thought I'd flown away from had followed me down a hole in the ground at the edge of the world. At the center of them, gaunt, unshaven, hollowed out to the bone by a mission that had ended in a tomb, stood my brother, Barrett, the 7th Prince, the one who had stood over me at the ceremony with that wide-splitting grin while our father stripped my name away, the one who laughed, the one who watched me, marched off into a forest to die, and thought it was the funniest thing the throne room had ever seen. Older now, heavier once, I'd heard, but the last weeks had eaten that off him, down to the desperate wire of a man out of exits, out of luck, watching his men die around him in the dark, hunting a power the ruins had promised and never held. There is a thing I learned in a village a long walk north of here, killing a worm the size of a house in front of a crowd. When a thing looks dead, you drive stakes through it and make sure, because a thing that looks dead is not always dead, and the ones who don't check are the ones it kills on the way back up. I'd said it out loud then, staking a corpse so it stayed a corpse. I hadn't understood I was talking about myself. My father hadn't checked. My brother hadn't checked. They'd looked at a boy glowing the wrong color and called him finished, and never once drove the stake. And here I was, climbed all the way back up, standing over the man who'd been so sure. For one heartbeat, I kept the alias. Just a stranger who fell in from above. A soaked adventurer named Alan Tyler. Nobody's brother. Nobody's prince. He took the choice away from me before I could make it. He was staring at my face like a man reading his own gravestone and finding a stranger's name on it. And I let myself, for the length of that stare, sit behind his eyes. Because I have always wanted to know what it looks like from there. It looks like the world coming apart at a seam you were sure was welded shut. He had signed the paper. He had watched the forest close over a boy with a knife and no class worth the word. That boy was dead. That boy had to be dead, because if he wasn't, then everything that came after, the laughing, the exile, the certainty, was a debt, and debts get called. The debt was standing over him, dry-eyed, in the one place his own desperation had run him aground. "You," he said, and his voice cracked around it. "You're supposed to be dead." That was the only whole sentence I let him keep. Everything after it, I heard the way you hear weather. The old contempt came up first, reflex, disbelief that the trash prince had lived at all, as if my being alive were an insult he hadn't authorized. Then the contempt cracked fast and ugly into the thing underneath it. need. He begged. He begged the way a proud man begs, sideways, furious at his own mouth for doing it, that the kingdom was losing, that he'd been sent to find a weapon and found only this hole, that the only strength left in the dark belonged to me now. And would I, for the blood we shared, use it, the blood we shared? He reached for that at the end. He hadn't remembered it at the ceremony. I let it all land. I stood at the edge of the water and let the man who threw me away finish asking me to save him, and I felt the thing I'd been carrying for over a year turn over once, quietly, and settle. Then I answered, my own voice, level in the cold. You told our father I was a disappointment, I said. You laughed when he called me worthless. You watched them send me off to die because the word over my head was the wrong word. I let the water drip. Look at us. Look which of us is drowning down here, begging. And look which one walked in on his own 2 feet, on the strength of exactly the thing you all threw away. I did not shout it. Shouting would have made it about me still wanting something from him. I didn't want anything from him. That was the whole of the vindication. Not that he'd finally see my worth, but that his seeing it or not had stopped being able to touch me. I had built a self they could not unmake. It was standing in front of him, dripping ruin water, and it was not afraid. For over a year, I had built walls against one sentence. You disappointed me. My father said it, and my brother laughed at it, and every timber I ever raised in that forest was an argument with it. A house, then a fence, then a fortress, then a thing that killed a dragon and flew. I'd told myself I was building for my mother, for Emily, for a place no one could throw me out of. Some of that was true, but under all of it, load-bearing, was a boy who still wanted the man who discarded him to look at what he'd made and take the word back. I could feel that boy going quiet now. Not healed, just finally answered. The sentence had been thrown back at its own source, and it had landed, and the room where it used to live in me had gone still. And Karen saw it. That was the part I hadn't planned and couldn't have. She was on her feet beside me, soaked and staring, and I watched her put it together in real time. The adventurer she'd recruited for a split of 6 platinum, named out loud as a prince, a foreign envoy of a whole kingdom on his knees in the mud, begging that adventurer for his life. She didn't say much. She said quietly, half to herself, that she'd known there was more to me, but she hadn't known it was this. My worth wasn't a private ache anymore, the kind you nurse alone at the bottom of a forest. It was out in the open, in front of a witness who mattered, undeniable. Someone had seen the account paid. That, more than Barrett's face, was the thing I hadn't let myself want and got anyway. Then came the part that was actually hard. He was beaten, cornered, out of men, out of the war he'd been so proud to be sent into. He was at my mercy in the exact shape I had once been at his. The throne room turned inside out, the powerless one now holding all of it. I could have ended him there in the dark, at the bottom of a ruin no one would ever dig out. His men were finished. No one living would ever know what happened to the 7th prince of a fallen kingdom. The dark keeps its secrets, and for one long breath, I wanted to. That was the honest thing, the thing I'd been circling for over a year without letting myself see it, not just to survive them, to become the kind of man who could do to them what they had done to me, cold, discarding, final. Win by turning into my father, prove I was strong enough to throw a person away and never look back. I stood there with my brother's life in one open hand and understood that if I closed it, the man who exiled me would have been right. Not about my class, about me. He'd have made me his in the one way that mattered, because that was the trap of it, and I'd walked to the edge of it without noticing. All the way through the forest, I'd thought the danger was dying. It wasn't. The danger was this, the moment where winning and becoming them wore the same face. My father threw away what he decided was worthless and never lost a night's sleep. If I stood here and did the same to him through his son, cold and certain and final, then I hadn't escaped that throne room at all. I'd just moved to the good seat. The exile would have worked. It would have made me exactly the man who ordered it. So I didn't close it. I spared him. Not because he'd earned it, not out of some soft place he'd have laughed at, but because the choice was finally, completely mine, and I would spend it as myself and not as him. I bound him. I took what I needed from him first, the shape of the war, how far it had come, what was left of home, and then I left him alive and broken, and knowing, for the rest of his days, that the trash prince had held his life and chosen to let him keep it. Judgment, without becoming the thing that had judged me. Some mercies are the heavier sentence. He didn't have anything left to say to that. Good. I was done needing him to. Karen asked me, low, what happened now? I looked up, actually up, out of the pit, toward the black seam we'd fallen through, and the world beyond it, because the ruins had never been the story. They were a doorway, and I could feel the size of what was on the other side of it now. Barrett being here meant the war had reached the Empire's edge. A 7th prince didn't crawl through a tomb at the far end of the world, hunting scraps of buried power, unless the throne behind him was already burning. And the war reaching the Empire's edge meant my mother and my sister Emily were still inside the kingdom that was losing it, behind the Ashen Mountains, in the house I'd been been marched away from, with the ground giving out under everything I'd left them standing on. I'd made a promise in that forest, the first night, a boy with a knife and nothing else. Get them out. It had been the 4th item on a list that started with just survive, back when I couldn't build a wall that held through a rainstorm. Now I could build a fortress that flew. The promise had stopped being a wish a scared child made to himself in the dark and started being a thing a man with power could actually go and do. I'd built a place no one could exile me from. I'd made the men who threw me away beg. The debt in the title over my whole exiled life was paid on the spot, to the face that laughed with a friend to see it done. And it wasn't enough, because there were still 2 people I loved on the wrong side of a collapsing kingdom, and a war walking toward them, and a promise I'd made to a knife-scared boy in a forest that I would come back for them. I looked up out of the dark